Chapter 1765. The hourglass of time and space distorted time and opened a vast passage that connected to the Soul Demon universe. Meanwhile, in the Soul Demon universe, an army of 100,000 soul demons was already gathering their strength, ready to go. The people present sucked in their breath. This time, no matter who it was, they all felt terrified. The nobles of Void City were even more horrified. Even though they had supported Cursed Goddess Soul, this support was nothing short of a disaster for them. How could she draw an army of 100,000 soul demons into Void City? Was Her Excellency Soul crazy? What was going on? It would have been fine if it were just the soul demons who had been banished to Void City, but now she had even attracted the army of the Soul Demon universe. She was going to doom Void City eternally. Her Excellency Soul, you can't do this. You will be punished by the Queen if you do this. Her Excellency Soul, please think twice. The nobles' eyes widened. They supported Cursed Goddess Soul, but they did not want Void City to be destroyed. In midair, Cursed Goddess Soul, who was in an extremely sorry state, glanced coldly at the crowd without any emotion in her eyes. Stop all this? Impossible. She had paid a great price for all this, and there was no turning back. Rumble. A monstrous power of sin was unleashed from the space-time passage. In midair, the black-robed man burst out laughing and unleashed the aura of a great soul overlord to the extreme. He had been holding it in for a long time, and now he could finally release it. Two more great soul overlords appeared in the space-time passage. The power of sin from the three great soul overlords almost enveloped the whole Void City. Countless people were trembling. Xiao Ai was dumbfounded, and despair filled her eyes. What was happening? Was this the end of Void City? Viscount Ash and Master Zhenyong were in despair, and their men had long given up resisting. How could they fight? They did not have the advantage in numbers, and now they had to fight against an army of 100,000 soul demons. They were not on the same level at all. Bufang landed in front of the restaurant. His expression was extremely solemn. The Lord Go, Hades' era, Marquis Langu, who had returned to his human form, Countess Xiaqiu, and the others, everyone had gathered in front of the restaurant, their faces solemn and dignified. Bufang couldn't help but gasp. An army of 100,000 soul demons, moreover, it was the army of the Soul Demon universe. This lineup was even more terrifying than when the chaotic universe was invaded by the soul demons. At the very least, the Chaosverse would be able to organize an army to fight back. But now, the army of Void City was under Soul's control. Bufang also felt troubled. Even the teleportation circle provided by the system couldn't do it, but the hourglass could. It was indeed a little terrifying. Lord Go and Hades' era didn't look too good either. This situation doesn't look good. Hades' era smacked his lips. On our side, everyone who can fight is here, right? Hades' era said with a spicy strip in his mouth. Hutu, who was standing beside him, nodded her head. Her expression was also rather solemn. The number of people on both sides was completely disproportionate. The people in front of the restaurant could not resist them at all. Viscount Ash and Master Zhenyong's subordinates had almost all fallen in the previous confrontation. Some were wounded and some had fallen. It was impossible to organize an effective defense line. What should they do? This was the gloom that hung over everyone's mind. Bufang had a headache as well. Dark cuisine could restrain these soul demons. However, they were facing an army of 100,000. They could drown him. Where's the Queen of Curses? Bufang could not help but turn to look at Marquis Langu and the others. Void City is about to be destroyed, but she's still hiding? Marquis Langu and the others hurriedly shook their heads. Their heads were shaking like rattle drums. Obviously, they also did not know why the Queen of Curses had not appeared. Rumble. The army was getting closer and closer. Finally, one figure after another poured out of the spacetime portal. The originally spacious sky suddenly became dark. Behind cursed goddess Soul was an army. The pressure was simply terrifying. Ha ha. Gluttony, it looks like you really can't hold on any longer. It's better for us to do it. I've long found this puny void city an eyesore. Two boorish voices resounded. Two great soul overlords were not wrapped in black robes. A great soul overlord was slender, with green skin and two tentacles on his head that looked like snails, which were wiggling slightly. There was no doubt that they were two great soul overlords. They were Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord was also a black-robed Great Soul Overlord. Of the 7 sins in the Soul Demon universe, 3 had gathered at this moment. Each of them was not weaker than a Duke-level expert. Together with the army of 100,000 soul demons, Void City was as fragile as a piece of tofu. Now that everyone is here, do your best. I've been waiting for the hourglass to turn for a long time. Don't let me down. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord said faintly. Unlike Envy Great Soul Overlord, who was as thin as a bamboo pole, Greed Great Soul Overlord looked like a huge poisonous scorpion. His hair was hanging upside down like a scorpion's tail, and he looked extremely ferocious. Oh, isn't this Soul? Hasn't she sat on the throne of Void City yet? Envy Great Soul Overlord said. Greed Great Soul Overlord sneered. I told you long ago that this girl is useless. We might as well attack. Soul glanced at the 2 great soul overlords, her face livid. The great soul overlords did not seem to take her seriously at all. Buzz, a black energy ball, emerged in Soul's palm. As soon as it appeared, the few great soul overlords who were acting presumptuously did not dare to continue. The energy ball was surrounded by the power of the 7 sins, and it seemed to be a symbol of status. I didn't summon you here to chat. Now, flatten this restaurant for me, Soul said coldly. She raised her hand and pointed a finger at the restaurant. Many soul demons fixed their eyes on the restaurant. A restaurant? There's actually a restaurant in Void City? Is this a joke? But it makes sense. If the Queen of Curses could still cause trouble, she wouldn't have let you cursed goddesses compete for the throne, and there would be nothing for us soul demons to do. Envy Great Soul Overlord laughed evilly. Rumble. In the next moment, his body suddenly shot out and turned into a black light. He hovered above the restaurant, blocking out the sun and the sky. Flattening restaurants and whatnot, I love it the most. Envy Great Soul Overlord burst out laughing. The next moment, a mighty force exploded out of his bamboo-like body. All of a sudden, he took a step forward, stomping on the restaurant. He was going to turn the restaurant into rubble. With this step, a vast amount of power of sin spread in all directions. Bam! 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 Outside the restaurant, the bodies of some of Viscount Ash's subordinates exploded. Even a saint of the Great Path could not withstand the power of this kick. Lord Dog's eyes narrowed, and his exquisite dog paw casually swiped at the void. Rumble! The dog's paw collided with the descending foot. The law of time collided with the power of sin. The clash between the law of time and the power of envy and sin rose and fell. Oh, the law of time. A heaven god of the chaotic universe? How did a heaven god turn into a dog? Envy Great Soul Overlord was shocked that his attack was fended off. Bufong furrowed his brows. He ordered the people who were scattered outside the restaurant to hide inside. At the same time, the floating souls were summoned into the restaurant by Bufong. According to the 2 great soul overlords, did something happen to the Queen of Curses of Void City? Otherwise, why hadn't she appeared yet? This was simply treason. According to the Queen of Curses' nature, she should have slaughtered all the soul demons. However, the army of Void City was under Soul's control. These people were originally exiles from the various universes. It was basically impossible for them to have the heart to defend Void City and switch sides to Bufong's side. Therefore, Bufong's side was at a complete disadvantage in this battle. It was just like the beginning. Seoul had the perfect advantage. It was impossible for her to lose. Hutu and Nethery, the two cursed goddesses, were no match for him at all. In the Queen of Curses palace, the domain that enveloped the whole palace suddenly shattered. Boom! A loud rumble rang out. Duchess Tianlian staggered back several steps and coughed up blood. The look in her eyes was pitiful. The moment the domain broke, a monstrous power of sin rushed into the senses of the three dukes. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan's expressions changed dramatically. This aura, so much power of sin, Tianlian, look at what you've done. Duchess Nightmare was a straightforward person, so she snapped. She was too lazy to say anything. She stomped her foot on the ground, soared into the sky, turned into a plume of black mist, and sped away. Duchess Yunlan looked at Duchess Tianlian in disappointment and shook her head. Her plump figure turned into a streak of light and flew away. In front of the Queen of Curses palace, Duchess Tianlian stumbled and sat on the ground. Her face was full of grief. She let out a long sigh and stood up. She turned around and glanced at the Queen of Curses palace, which was closed tightly behind her. Then, she glanced at the dark sky in the distance. There was a look of determination in her eyes. Envy Great Soul Overlord and Lord Go began to fight in the void. A Great Soul Overlord against a modern-day Heaven God. This was a clash between the top fighting forces of two universes. The Soul Demon universe was extremely powerful, and it was facing the desolate, chaotic universe. The battle was earth-shattering. The more they fought, the more excited they became. They rushed into the clouds, the starry sky, and the world was destroyed. Countless stars were reduced to rubble in the battle between the two. Fortunately, all the stars in the universe where Void City was located were dead. Envy Great Soul Overlord struck. Greed Great Soul Overlord naturally joined the fight as well. Rumble! His body rushed out, shrouded in the terrible power of sin. A huge scorpion's barbed tail fell from the sky and smashed toward the restaurant. If the tail hit its target, half of Void City would crumble. Beauty, I'll be right back. Wait for me. Hades' Era turned to look at Hutu. She rolled her eyes at him, but he did not mind. With the spicy strip dangling from his mouth and the law of life swirling around him, he rushed out of the restaurant and headed straight for the barbed tail. Come on, grandson of a great soul overlord. Your grandpa Era is here. Bam! Hades' Era roared with the spicy strip dangling from his mouth. The scorpion's barbed tail hit him in an instant, and he fell hard to the ground. Everyone was speechless. Greed Great Soul Overlord narrowed his eyes. Was someone trying to stop him just now? Suddenly, Greed Great Soul Overlord's pupils constricted. The scorpion's barbed tail was suddenly lifted up by someone. Hades' Era stood on both legs. With the spicy strip dangling from his mouth and the huge barbed tail in his hand, his arms erupted with infinite strength. Bam! The scorpion's barb was directly crushed by him. With the spicy strip dangling from his mouth, Era sped toward Greed Great Soul Overlord. The two of them wrestled in midair. Why could Hades' Era's law of life, which was so pure and holy, army attack, flatten the restaurant? Seeing that the two great soul overlords were entangled, cursed goddess Soul's eyes turned cold, and she suddenly raised the black ball in her hand. It was as if she had given a military order. The army of soul demons moved in an instant. Rumble! In an instant, countless soldiers shot toward the restaurant. Every soul demon was unleashing infinite power. It was as if they could flatten the restaurant in a flash. Stop! In the distance, two loud shouts rang out. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan had finally appeared. Chapter 1766. The Dukes had appeared. In Void City, Dukes were the strongest fighting force after the Queen of Curses. Their appearance was like a pillar of support, allowing many people hiding in the restaurant to heave a sigh of relief. Yu and Huda breathed sighs of relief as well. When they saw Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan, they were much more relieved. With the addition of two dukes, The high-end fighting force on their side was a little stronger than that of the other side. In this way they could still fight. The attack of the soul demons could not be stopped by a single roar from the Duke. The Duke's words might be useful to the nobles of Void City, but to the soul demons they were like wind passing by their ears. Boom! Bufang let the crowd into the restaurant. Then, the attacks of the soul demons fell and smashed into the restaurant. In an instant, it smashed into the restaurant. The entire restaurant seemed like it was about to be crushed into ruins in an instant. However, soon, everyone was dumbfounded. No matter how the soul demons attacked, they could not shake the restaurant at all. The restaurant was as stable as a boulder. The nobles of Void City looked as if they had seen a ghost. Inside the restaurant, the crowd, who was on the verge of despair, widened their eyes in surprise. "He's fine," Xiao Ai said with a lingering fear, patting her flat chest. Outside the restaurant, the soul demons were roaring. Some of them had their mouths wide open, filled with disgusting mucus. Bufang, on the other hand, was very calm. This was all within his expectations. The restaurant's defense was invincible, and no one could destroy anything in it. However, Bufang was not a man who would let himself be taken advantage of. He opened the restaurant door. A soul demon roared and pounced at him. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang took a step forward. Xiaobai followed behind Bufang. As the soul demon roared, Xiaobai threw out his huge palm and slapped the soul demon's head. With a boom, the soul demon's head was crushed. The soul demon's soul howled as it was devoured by Xiaobai. Purple-eyed Xiaobai was extremely powerful. Bam! The door of the restaurant closed again. Inside the restaurant, everyone could only lean against the window and watch the battle outside in the sky. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan breathed a sigh of relief. Then, their gazes became much sharper. A long sword appeared in Duchess Nightmare's hand. She swung it horizontally, and the void seemed to be cut in half. The sword light swept out and cut thousands of soul demons in half. Duchess Yunlan also attacked with a cold face. She raised her hand and ice needles emerged. With a flick of her finger, the needles whistled in every direction. The ice needles were wrapped in curse power, and when they pierced through a soul demon, they corroded the soul demon into mud. Bufang and Xiaobai also charged forward. Holding the spear, Xiaobai looked like a peerless god of slaughter. Every time he swung it, he took the life of a soul demon. At the same time, countless soul demons were vanishing from the light beams shot out of his palms. Holding the black turtle constellation wok, Bufang killed one soul demon with each wok. The wok was coated with a divine flame, which had a powerful burning power and could burn the soul demons to ashes. The two of them opened a bloody path in front of the restaurant. The army of 100,000 soul demons was forced back by Bufang and his companions. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord narrowed his eyes. He took a step forward and headed straight for the two Duke. All he needed to do was to hold them back. When Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord were free, the two Dukes would be finished. In the distance, Lord Go and Envy Great Soul Overlord were fighting fiercely. However, the Great Soul Overlord was so strong that he was showing signs of suppressing Lord Go. On the other side, Hades' Era was in the same situation. He was almost completely suppressed by Greed Great Soul Overlord. This was not good news for Void City. Bufang hovered in midair. He was facing an army of 100,000. Although the number of soul demons had increased, Bufang was not out of ideas. Bufang took a deep breath. Bufang asked Xiaobai to hold them back for a while. Buzz, his spirit sea was pushed to its limit. It was as if the whole Void City was under Bufang's control. The black turtle constellation wok floated in midair. The next moment it began to tremble. Bufang's mental force struck the wok like a hammer, causing it to split into 2, then into 3, and then into 10,000. Countless black wok floated around Bufang. Since there are so many soul demons, I'll use more dark dishes to deal with them, It's not impossible to cook 10,000 dark dishes at the same time. Of course, this was a challenge for Bufang. After all, every dish required meticulous planning, and a lot of mental energy was needed to prepare it. Cooking 10,000 dark dishes at the same time was very stressful for Bufang. Cursed Goddess Soul saw so many black walk in midair, but she did not know what Bufang was trying to do. Go. Kill this chef. Cursed Goddess Soul said coldly. As soon as her voice rang out, a soul overlord who had just stepped into the realm of chaotic saints, as well as several ordinary soul overlords, charged toward Bufang. 4 soul demons, any universe could produce soul overlords. Therefore, they had a very large number of soul overlords. After all, they had invaded countless universes. Rumble! Xiao Bai's energy beam shot out and tore a soul overlord apart. Then, he fought the soul demons in midair. One punch after another, all of them hit their target. All the ordinary soul overlords were crushed, while the chaotic saint-level soul overlord kept fighting with Xiao Bai. The battle was stimulating the void. Bufang's movements were very exaggerated, which attracted the attention of many soul demons. Many people in the restaurant were amazed. Is owner Bu planning to cook 10,000 wok at the same time? Xiao Ai cried out in surprise. Many people widened their eyes. Cooking 10,000 dishes at the same time. This scene is too spectacular. Bufang closed his eyes. His mental force swept out like a storm. One ingredient after another hovered in midair. It formed a standoff with the army of soul demons in the distance. With a thought in his mind, Bufang's mental force almost stirred heaven and earth. Every ingredient was cut and chopped, and he began to cook them in an orderly manner. The pressure was tremendous. Even a heaven god would feel great pressure when he was controlling 10,000 ingredients of high grade at the same time. However, halfway through the cooking, Bufang began to pant. In the distance, Cursed Goddess Soul's pupils constricted. She seemed to remember the method Bufang used to suppress the army of soul demons. Those bowls of strange dark cuisine seemed to be able to suppress the army of soul demons. Quick! Kill that chef! Don't dawdle! Cursed Goddess Soul roared furiously. She could not let Bufang finish cooking the dishes. The soul demons rushed out like a torrent, heading straight for Bufang. Bufang's expression did not change. He was still cooking. Each black turtle constellation wok was steaming hot. In the restaurant, stimulated by this shocking scene, the powerhouses rushed out one after another. They rushed into the clouds and stood in front of Bufang, facing these soul demons head-on. Rumble! However, the moment they collided, they felt as if they were being crushed by a mountain. They could hardly breathe. Lord Go and Hades' era were also suppressed and could not move. The situation of this battle was really unfavorable for them. Perhaps Bufang's dishes could turn the tide of the battle. Xiao Bai hovered in front of Bufang with a spear in his hand. He alone blocked hundreds and thousands of soul demons and became Bufang's sturdy shield. Rumble! Hot steam billowed up. Bufang's eyes were bloodshot. At this moment, Bufang realized that his mental force was not enough. However, this was about it. Bam! 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 Every black turtle constellation wok emitted a soft sound. Then, hot steam surged, and one stargazy pie after another jumped out of the wok. The stargazy pie was like a herring in the starry sky, its eyes wide and filled with fighting spirit. Bufang's face was pale. Cooking 10,000 dishes at the same time was a huge drain on him. After all, these dishes were not made with ordinary ingredient. Each of them was filled with divine power and spiritual energy, and the slightest carelessness could lead to an explosion. Once one exploded, it would become a series of explosions. But fortunately, everything was fine now. Bufang pushed his arms forward. One after another, the stargazy pie flew out, whistling through the air toward the many soul demons. The eyes of the experts, who were fighting the soul demons and were covered in wounds, lit up. As soon as the stargazy pie entered the battlefield, it immediately gained an absolute advantage. Although they were soul demons from the soul demon universe, they were still soul demons. They were all attracted at once. One by one, they flew toward the stargazy pie. The experts of Void City felt that the pressure on them had been greatly reduced, and it could even be said that they did not feel any pressure at all. Marquis Langu was surrounded by the sinful power of the soul demons. At this moment, he could not help but widen his eyes. Rumble! The crimson divine flame spread across the sky in an instant. The bodies of the soul demons began to burn, and soon, they were burned into nothingness. Xiao Bai's purple eyes flashed. Without holding back, he attacked again and again. The soul demons who had spontaneously combusted were crushed into ashes by him. Countless broken souls were sucked into his mouth. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. For a moment, the 10,000 stargazy pie was under great pressure. But it was not over yet. Bufang mustered his mental force again, and a mental force storm swept out. The 18 hell curry came out of the wok. Every bowl of 18 hell curry was smeared on the faces of those soul demons. It made the soul demons shiver. The death spicy strip came out of the wok. Like arrows, they whistled through the air and pierced one soul demon after another, causing them to explode. Bufang was panting for breath. This was the first time he felt so tired. After working for a while, his spirit sea was almost depleted. He took out an oyster pancake and stuffed it into his mouth. Only then did Bufang feel a little better. Rumble! In the distance, Envy Great Soul Overlord's paw fell. He slammed Lord Go to the ground, and with a boom, a huge palm print appeared on the ground of Void City. Countless cracks spread rapidly. Hades' Era's face was very unsightly as he was pierced by scorpion barbs. Even with the law of life, he felt a wave of weakness. Boom! The ground exploded, and Lord Go soared into the sky with cat-like steps. His eyes were sharp. Envy Great Soul Overlord waved his palm, and a metal stick shrouded in the black power of sin appeared in his hand. Just in time. I'll beat this dog with this stick. Envy Great Soul Overlord grinned and burst out laughing. In the distance, a pair of black scissors appeared in Greed Great Soul Overlord's hand. A cracking sound rang out as if it was about to cut heaven and earth into pieces. These were weapons given to them by the Soul God, and each of them was extremely powerful. It was because of these weapons that they were able to suppress Lord Go and Hades' Era. In midair exhausted, Bufang sat down. His vermilion robe rustled. Bufang turned to look at Lord Go and Hades' Era, who had fallen into a passive position. He frowned. Neither Lord Go nor Hades' Era had a suitable weapon. How could they defeat a great soul overlord? He took a few deep breaths. Bufang's eyes lit up. Then, he mustered his mental force again. The Qilin transmigration ladle, the white tiger stove, and the dragon bone knife appeared at the same time. Bufang began to cook in midair. A dazzling golden light rose. Before long, it was hot. Bufang had finished 2 dishes. Exhausted, Bufang sat down, raised his hand, and flicked his finger at the bowl. Buzz, the sweet and sour ribs and spicy strips immediately flew toward Lord Go and Hades' Era. Lord Go, Era, your weapons are here. Chapter 1767. Lord Go, Era, your weapons are here. Bufang's mental force was extremely weak, so he used all his strength to flick the sweet and sour ribs and the golden spicy strip out. A bowl of sweet and sour ribs exuded a strong aroma. A spicy strip glowed with a golden light. Weapons? Where are the weapons? Bufang's voice was very loud, and many people were stunned. Envy Great Soul Overlord. The powerful Great Soul Overlord's eyes widened as he watched the bowl of sweet and sour ribs, which to him was emitting an endless stench, fly past him. Don't King tell me that. This plate of meat is a weapon? He roared inwardly. Lord Go's eyes lit up and he stuck out his tongue. Striding with his enchanting cat-like steps, he walked in midair. The sweet and sour ribs fell and hovered in front of Lord Go. The aroma emanating from the sweet and sour ribs made Lord Go narrow his eyes. Just by smelling it, he felt energized. As for Hades' era, he had already dashed out like a madman. Even though his body was covered with the scorpion's barbs, which were filled with the power of sin, as he pinched the spicy strip, Hades' era's eyes lit up. At that moment, he felt as if he had been reborn. Was this the weapon Bu Fong young man had prepared for him? Ha ha ha! I am a man with a weapon now. Hades' era was very excited. The law of life in his body, which had been weak, suddenly soared and forcibly broke the restraint. The two great soul overlords turned pale with fright. A bowl of meat and a spicy strip could actually make these two fellows full of strength again? Bu Fong watched Lord Go take the sweet and sour ribs and Hades' era pinch the spicy strip, and he could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. At this point, all his tasks were considered completed. The next step would be left to the Duke and Lord Go. Bu Fong floated down and landed in front of the restaurant. He sat down on the stone steps in front of the restaurant. Xiao Ai looked at Bu Fong in surprise. Little Hu, who was in Yu's arms, jumped into Bu Fong's arms, stuck out his tongue and licked Bu Fong's cheek, as if saying, "This fox also wants a weapon, of course." Bu Fong just rubbed Little Hu's head and ignored her. Two dukes were fighting Gluttony Soul Overlord. For a moment, he didn't manage to gain the upper hand. Instead, he felt like he was evenly matched. This situation caused the two dukes to frown. They had consumed too much of their energy in Duchess Tianlian's domain. It took a lot of effort to break it. Now, facing this great soul overlord, they could not defeat him even if they joined hands. Cursed Goddess Soul's face was very unsightly. The army of 100,000 soul demons was destroyed by Bu Fong, a chef. Almost half of the soul demons burned themselves, and countless souls were swallowed by the iron puppet. The rest of the soul demons were still grabbing food floating in midair. Were those stinky, spicy, and ugly food worth these soul demons being so crazy about? In front of the restaurant, you walked slowly. That gave Xiao Ai pause. Bu Fong could not help but frown and look at you. In the distance, holding the bow of bliss, Hudu slowly walked out, walking side by side with you. They looked at each other and seemed to see the determination in each other's eyes. The next moment, the curse power soared into the sky. Rumble! Yu and Hudu immediately turned into streams of light and rushed into the sky. Cursed Goddess Soul was taken aback. Then, her eyes shone brightly as she stared at Yu and Hudu, who were approaching in midair. At this moment, the three cursed goddesses collided. Yu finally dared to come out. Soul was very excited. In terms of fighting prowess, she was really not afraid of Yu and Hutu. She was afraid that the two of them would not come out. That chef was really too strange. She had thought that he was bragging that he could fight an army alone. Now, she felt that her face was stinging. That chef really can fight an army. Buzz, a black orb appeared in Soul's hand. Yu and Hutu looked at her indifferently. The next moment, the three of them began to fight. Yu's fighting prowess was only at the level of a saint of the Great Path, while Hudu was a peak saint of the Great Path. Even when they joined forces, they were still suppressed by Soul. However, they had to step forward. Void City had fallen into a state of chaos. Many people had already lost their lives for a mere king-level expert. Now, it was time to put an end to this. The battle between the three cursed goddesses had alarmed everyone. The nobles were watching from a distance. At Soul's order, the soul demons also stopped attacking. Except for the battle between the great soul overlords and the Lord Go. The noisy and chaotic Void City quieted down. Everyone's attention was focused on the sky. Yu and Hudu are fighting Soul together. Down below, Bu Fong had a serious look in his eyes. Owner Bu. What should we do? Her Excellency Nethery is not strong enough. How can she be a match for Her Excellency Soul? Even with Her Excellency Hutu, it won't work. Her Excellency Soul has broken through to the level of a chaotic saint. Xiao Ai kept chattering anxiously in Bufang's ear. She was very worried. She could not help but worry. After all, if Nethery and Hudu were killed by Soul, there would be no suspense about the throne of Void City. Don't worry, Bufang said faintly. He said as he ate the oyster pancake. He also handed Xiao Ai an oyster pancake. Xiao Ai was worried and had no appetite now. However, after glancing at the pancake, she took it from Bufang's hand and ate it while worrying. Rumble! Xiao Bai returned. His whole body was steaming, and his purple eyes were flashing. He had devoured too many soul demons' souls. His aura was extremely terrifying now, just like that of the great demon. That's enough. Don't overeat, Bufang said, patting Xiao Bai's round belly. Xiao Bai raised his hand, scratched his round head, and nodded. The void was divided into two camps. The battle between the three cursed goddesses amazed everyone. It was a show that belonged to the three women. Of course, compared to the battle between the three cursed goddesses, the Duke-level battle in the distance was even more shocking. They were the real machines of destruction, and Void City was almost destroyed by them. Bufang, who was sitting in front of the restaurant and eating an oyster pancake, suddenly paused. Where's that little girl? Bufang asked Xiao Ai, whose mouth was covered with oil. Oh? I don't know, Xiao Ai said with a round mouth. That little girl has a mysterious origin. She has been in the restaurant all this time, so where is she now? Bufang frowned, but he did not think too much about it. Rumble! Envy Great Soul Overlord was a little confused now. Before this, he had been suppressing the black dog in front of him. However, ever since the black dog picked up the bowl of meat, the black dog seemed to have gone berserk. Whenever he ate a piece of stinking meat, an exquisite dog paw would come at him. Both its strength and aura were much stronger than before. The next moment, Envy Great Soul Overlord was knocked to the ground. Even the dog-beating stick was knocked away. That was a weapon given to him by the Soul God. He was a little dazed after a few consecutive paws, and he needed a break. In the distance, Greed Great Soul Overlord had nothing left to live for. Ever since Hades' era grabbed the spicy strip, he had been in high spirits. He kept whipping him with the spicy strip. The golden spicy strip lashed at his body, causing the sinful energy in his body to vanish. Is that spicy strip poisonous? The black scissors were knocked away. Greed Great Soul Overlord's body was covered with whip marks. Now, he could only keep fleeing in the void. He was afraid that this guy would catch him and give him a good beating. Hades' era's eyes were full of excitement. With the death spicy strip in his mouth and the golden spicy strip in his hand, he kept whipping. The Great Soul Overlord, who was suppressing him, was thrown into a panic. He was very excited. Sure enough, spicy strips are the best. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan did not want to kill Gluttony Great Soul Overlord now because it was not realistic. They just wanted to keep this guy busy. In the distance, the three cursed goddesses were fighting. They could not get involved in such a battle. Suddenly, there was a flash in the void. The next moment, a Great Soul Overlord, covered with whip marks and emitting black smoke, rushed to Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's side. Both Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan were taken aback. Hey, don't run if you have the guts. Have a taste of I's 13 whips of the spicy strip. It's a 360-degree whip with no blind spots. Hades' era stepped through the air and rushed over. He glanced at Duchess Yunlan. His eyes lit up and he smiled. Hello, beautiful. Boom. Envy Great Soul Overlord was also knocked flying backward. His face was covered with dog paw print. His aura was extremely weak. Neither of them had expected that they, who were holding the weapons given by the Soul God, would be suppressed so miserably. The main reason was that the man and the dog, who seemed to be on steroids, made it impossible for them to fight back. Lord Go rolled his tongue, swallowed a piece of sweet and sour ribs, and walked slowly toward them with his elegant cat-like steps. Envy Great Soul Overlord shuddered with fear. There was no doubt that Bufang's camp had won in terms of high-end combat power. Bufang was not surprised by this. Lord Go and Era had awakened their heaven god consciousness by relying on dishes. Lord Go used sweet and sour ribs, and Hades' Era used spicy strip. Even if these two dishes were not their weapons, the boost they gave them was absolutely terrifying. Damn it! Wrath, sloth, and lust are fighting the almighty experts of the primitive universe. They can't come here. Otherwise, when the 7 of us join forces, all these people will die. Envy Great Soul Overlord growled. If they did not seize Void City in this battle, it would be a crushing defeat for the Soul Demon universe. Buzz, Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, did not want to fight either. They pulled away and appeared in front of the army of soul demons. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord glanced at the defeated army. His face grew livid. He had spent an hourglass of time and space, and this was the result he got. He could not believe that his army of soul demons was stopped by a chef. Damn it! Sure enough, all chefs must die. As His Excellency's Soul God said, chefs are the most abominable existences in this world. In midair, Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's eyes turned and rested on Bufang. His eyes were full of killing intent. He was thinking that he had to find an opportunity to kill this chef. Only then could the army of soul demons be invincible. Otherwise, for the soul demons, as long as this chef existed, they would not be able to rest easy. Bam! Energy collided in midair. Huda's face was extremely unsightly. He was surrounded by ghostly green curse power, and the cursed snake was sticking out its forked tongue and roaring into the sky. The Bow of Bliss had no advantage over Soul at all. The Soul God's spear in her hand was even more powerful than the Bow of Bliss. What should I do? If this goes on, they might really lose. Huda was a little anxious. In fact, she had already informed the primitive universe with a voice transmission, but she did not know if anyone would come to help her. Otherwise, she might not be able to survive this disaster. Although the army of soul demons seemed to be retreating, at least half of them were still eyeing them. In terms of high-end combat power, the great soul overlords were strong enough to compete with them. It would not do them any good to delay. Huda was a little anxious. In the distance, Soul, on the other hand, looked very calm because she was confident of victory. Huda and you wanted to put up a fight, but they had no chance at all. With such a good card in her hand, how could the tables be turned so easily? She looked at you. Suddenly, she found that you seemed to be very calm. In front of the restaurant, the corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. In midair, you, wrapped in curse power, slowly took out a flatbread. Then, she stuffed it into her mouth and took a bite. Boundless Fortune Chi and Primal Chaos Chi immediately intertwined Bufang's enhanced fortune flatbread. This was the trump card that made you so confident. Chapter 1768. The Fortune Flatbread. It was a trick that Bufang had developed a long time ago. However, as his cultivation base grew, the effect of the flatbread was not as good as before, and Bufang had even forgotten about it. After all, its effect was heaven-defying, but that was only if one's cultivation base was not strong enough. At the level of a heaven god, the fortune energy in the flatbread could no longer provide fortune. In other words, the flatbread could not provide the fortune that a heaven god needed. Therefore, Bufang had improved it. After all, it was the product of his research, and it was not difficult for Bufang to improve it. Besides, there was Nyo Hansan, who specialized in research in the heaven and earth farmland. With the addition of chaotic energy, the improved flatbread was completed. It was also the first time that the improved flatbread appeared on such an important occasion. You held the flatbread in her hand and faced cursed goddess Soul. Huda, on the other hand, was a little confused. Soul, on the other hand, did not take it seriously. The gap between their strength was not something that could be closed by a flatbread. The gap between a chaotic saint and a saint of the Great Path was not only in terms of chaotic energy. They also had an understanding of the will of heaven and earth. Huda held the bough of bliss in her hand. This divine artifact from the primitive universe had helped her a lot. Otherwise, she would not even be qualified to fight Soul. After all, this divine artifact came from a chaotic saint of the primitive universe. The sword shot out, whistling through the air, piercing through the void and shattering it. Soul raised her hand. The pitch-black power of sin wrapped around her hand and blocked the spinning arrow. After all, Huda could not bring out the full power of the bough of bliss. After all, it was a divine artifact that could shoot through the sun with one arrow. She held the fortune flatbread in her hand, on which the fortune energy and chaotic energy were swirling. She stared at it with her beautiful eyes, then opened her little mouth and ate it one bite at a time. Huda was dumbfounded. Why is this girl still eating flatbread at a time like this? But Yu's cultivation base is not strong enough, and Huda can't be counted on. Buzz! The void kept trembling. Huda clenched her teeth. Her spirit awareness kept surging, and she shot arrows one after another. The bowstring on the bough of bliss kept plucking. Everyone in the surroundings was paying attention to this battle. After all, this battle would decide the outcome of the competition between the cursed goddesses. However, judging from the current situation, you and Huda may not be a match for Soul even if you join forces on the Soul Demon side. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord narrowed his eyes and watched with excitement in them. Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord were also hovering in midair. Although they were being suppressed by Lord Go and Hades' era, they were still able to defeat Lord Go. But they were not the main characters in this competition. The main character was Soul. Bufang sat on the ground, gasping for air. However, his eyes were fixed on Nethery, who was hovering in midair. Although I've given you the enhanced fortune flatbread, things like the fortune flatbread mainly depend on luck. Of course, Yu's luck had always been good, so although Bufang was nervous, he wasn't too worried. Rumble! Lord Go, Hades' era, and the two dukes landed one after another. For a moment, the atmosphere was somewhat stagnant. Lord Go stuffed the last piece of sweet and sour ribs into his mouth and smacked his lips. With the death spicy strip in his mouth and the golden spicy strip in his hand, Hades' era could not stop chewing excitedly. Duchess Yunlan and Duchess Nightmare glanced at Bufang, sighed, and turned to look at the battle in the sky. They were protecting Yu and Hutu, but now it seemed that they seemed to have neglected their duty. Duchess Tianlian had tried her best to stop them, and there was a reason. What's going on with the Queen of Curses? Bufang took a deep breath and said. Marquis Langu and the others might not know, but the two dukes should know. Duchess Nightmare glanced at Bufang. Her smoky hair waved in the wind and her face was cold. She did not answer. Duchess Yunlan shook her head. There were some things that she did not know. Void City had been cornered by the army of soul demons, but the Queen of Curses still had not shown up. They were very puzzled by this. In midair, Soul approached Hutu inch by inch. Hutu was forced to retreat. She felt a great pressure. The sneer on Soul's face made Hutu frightened. The bough of bliss trembled and fired thousands of arrows, but they still could not stop Soul. Gulp. You swallowed the last fortune flatbread. She burped. You stuck out her tongue and licked her lip. Then, her eyes lit up slightly. In fact, she was looking forward to it. Of course, she knew about the fortune flatbread. It was Bufang's specialty. However, you did not know what effect it would have. She swallowed the enhanced fortune flatbread. Everything seemed to have quietened down. Nothing strange happened. Huda could not help but despair when she saw this. Why is this girl in a daze in such an emergency? Boom! Tens of thousands of sinful energies gathered together and formed the head of a terrifying beast, striking Huda's body. Huda's face turned pale and she staggered backward. The bough of bliss was knocked away. Huda's face was drained of blood. We're going to lose. We're going to lose. Once she was defeated, the throne of Void City would become Soul's. The war between the primitive universe and the Soul Demon universe would be completely changed. Huda closed her eyes in despair. Soul stepped into the void, and the power of sin spread behind her. The next moment, she approached Hutu in a flash. Her eyes were full of killing intent. Too many accidents had happened, so she dared not to leave out the possibility of an accident. So you and Hutu must die. Only dead people will not cause any accidents. After killing these two cursed goddesses, I'll take my time to deal with the chef. When she sits on the throne of Void City, I'll exterminate him. I'll be the final victor. I'll be the final victor. Rumble. Soul's eyes were filled with excitement. The power of 7 sins fused into one and turned into an extremely sharp spear, the tip of which exuded evil power. It looked like the sharpest spear in the world. In the distance, the 3 great soul overlords could not help but envy as they watched. That's the spear of sin. Although it's only a projection, its power is comparable to our soul artifact. The great soul overlord was a little jealous. The spear of sin was a weapon that belonged to the soul god. Legend had it that a single spear could pierce several universes. It could destroy countless living beings. It was a peerless weapon that stood at the pinnacle of the universe. Although what Soul had condensed was not the real spear of sin, its power was not weak either. It would not be difficult for the spear to kill Hutu. In fact, it could even pierce both Hutu and you. Die. Soul focused her eyes, and killing intent exploded out of her. The long spear in his hand was suddenly thrown down with the intention of piercing through Hutu. Suddenly, at the moment when the spear fell, Hutu was about to lose all hope. A fair and slender palm suddenly emerged. It grabbed the spear. The spear could not move any further. Oh! That gave Soul pause. She jerked her head up and looked at the person who had stopped her spear. It's you. At this moment, Yu's figure seems to have changed slightly. Her black hair fluttered in the wind, and her eyes were as deep as the black holes of the universe. Blue veins could be seen spreading from the corners of her eyes to her ears, giving her an extremely tough look. Most importantly, there seemed to be a crystal inlaid between Yu's brows. It was a Tao crystal, the crystal that represented a universe. What's going on? The next moment, a vast amount of chaotic energy surged toward her. Rumble. Cursed goddess Soul did not expect this at all. You is a saint of the great path, and your cultivation base is not very strong. But at this moment, the aura and pressure you are showing are even comparable to that of a Duke-level expert. How is this possible? Cursed goddess Soul was dumbfounded. The spear could not go any further. You exerted force in her palm, and a ghostly green cursed snake coiled around her and thrust out. Rumble. Soul's black cursed snake collided with Yu's ghostly green cursed snake. The collision shook violently, and a rumbling sound filled the air. Surprisingly, Soul took a few steps back in midair. She was a chaotic saint. Yet, she lost to a saint of the great path in a collision. All of this, it was completely beyond her knowledge and understanding. Hutu was dumbfounded. She did not seem to have expected that you would suddenly go berserk. In front of the restaurant, Duchess Yunlan's eyes widened. As Yu's protector, how could she not know Yu's cultivation base? But now you had forced Soul back with one move. This is too strange. Duchess Nightmare could not help but have a strange look on her face. Yunlan, has your cursed goddess been pretending to be weak all this time? Duchess Yunlan rolled her eyes. She knew nothing. The corner of Bu Feng's mouth twitched slightly. Xiao Ai covered her mouth in surprise. I can't believe Her Excellency Nethery is so powerful. The fortune flatbread has indeed worked. Hades Era's eyes lit up. He held a death spicy strip between his lips. He had a deep impression of the fortune flatbread. It had forcibly pulled the soul of his father, Hades Tenzang, out of the transmigration. It was enough to show how amazing it was. This is the enhanced version of the fortune flatbread, mixed with chaotic energy. According to the fluctuation of the law of time that erupted from the flatbread just now, the current you should be you in the future. But I don't know how long you will be in the future. At least, you's current cultivation base should have reached the peak of the chaotic saint realm, which is equivalent to a duke-level expert. Bufang said. He then explained the reason for Yu's sudden outburst. A flatbread? Because of a flatbread? Many people were stunned. Is this flatbread so heaven-defying? It's not heaven-defying. This kind of improvement has a time limit. If it's really heaven-defying, it should be when you directly jump to the chaotic saint level and stay there forever. Bufang smacked his lips and said. In midair, Hutu was pleasantly surprised. She looked at you, but the look in her eyes made her shudder. At this moment, you seemed to be a supreme existence high above the 9 heavens. She was even nobler than dukes. Impossible! You can't defeat me! Cursed goddess Soul couldn't believe it. Buzz, the black ball appeared in her hand again. It spun and turned into the spear of sin. He grabbed the spear and threw it at Nethery. In midair, Yu's dress fluttered in the wind. She slowly raised her hand and caught the spear of sin. The cursed snake coiled around the spear. Puff! The spear of sin turned into black smoke and dissipated. In the blink of an eye, Yu appeared at Soul's side. She threw out a palm. Soul hurriedly threw out a palm. The 2 palms collided. Soul's body seemed to have suffered a serious injury, and she was hit by a tremendous force and smashed into the ground. An uproar rang through heaven and earth. The atmosphere in Void City changed in an instant. I can't believe that Her Excellency Soul, the strongest of the 3 cursed goddesses, was beaten to death by you. The Soul Demon camp also let out roars. The eyes of the 3 great soul overlords flashed with fierce gleams. Rubble tumbled in the ruins. Soul got up from the rubble. Suddenly, she felt a chill run down her spine. In midair, you raised her hand, which was now covered with cursed snakes. The next moment, they piled up in front of her, their heads less than an inch away from her eyes. In the blink of an eye, they could tear her apart. After eating the fortune flatbread, they had brought you out from 10,000 years in the future. Soul was completely defeated. She did not dare to move. Her mind was trembling. Hutu pursed her lips in disbelief. The nobles around her were dumbfounded. The result of the battle was obvious. Her hair spread out and brushed Yu's face. Her delicate face was as calm as still water. You looked at Soul as if she had just accomplished something insignificant. You lost. Chapter 1769. Yu's voice was indifferent. At this moment, she exuded a different temperament. At least, she was completely different from the Yu of the past. Not only had Yu's cultivation base skyrocketed, but her mentality had also changed. One had to admit that the fortune flatbread was indeed heaven-defying. The enhanced version of the fortune flatbread was even more unparalleled. 10,000 years later, Yu's mentality and cultivation base were far beyond the level you are now. After all, as one lived for a long time, one would see more things, and one's mentality would naturally change. Soul was struck dumb, and her eyes seemed to have turned gray. The result of the battle between the 3 cursed goddesses was beyond everyone's imagination. Soul, who was the most likely to win, was lying miserably on the ground. On the other hand, Nethery, who was the least likely to win, had become the true victor. The cursed snake flicked its forked tongue, and a terrible aura gushed over Soul's face, making her feel real despair. The pupils of the 3 great soul overlords constricted at this moment. This woman could actually defeat Soul, who was holding the spear of sin. How was that possible? Although the spear of sin was not Soul's true form, it was the supreme weapon of Soul God. How could it be easily suppressed by this woman? Rumble. The 3 great souls took the initiative. Their auras fluctuated as if they had caused landslides and tsunamis, caused the heavens and earth to change drastically. The army of soul demons behind them also opened their mouths and roared. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan exchanged a glance and saw the solemn look in each other's eyes. Then, they turned around and rose into the air in a flash, facing the army of soul demons from a distance. Marquis Langu and the others followed behind the two dukes. With the dukes around, they were more confident. In midair, the soul demon camp and the dukes of Void City seemed to be clashing. The nobles of Void City, who had chosen to stand behind Soul, scattered like monkeys when a tree fell. At this moment, like monkeys scattering when a tree falls, they quickly gathered behind the dukes. Soon, they had formed a powerful army. Although the cohesion of this army was not good, its fighting prowess was undeniable. Hoodoo was overjoyed. She thought it was all over, but she never thought that you would give her such a surprise. Fortune flatbread? I can't believe that Chef's fortune flatbread has such a magical effect. She let you suppress Soul in a crushing manner. For a moment, Hoodoo was a little curious about the fortune flatbread. However, none of this mattered now. They had won. The contest for the throne of Void City was once again in suspense. In other words, they, who originally had no chance of winning, now had a 50-50 chance of winning against Soul. Holding the bliss bow, Hoodoo narrowed his eyes. In the distance, Soul was taken away by the three great soul overlords, looking a little lost. Soul was still in disbelief. She couldn't figure out why you, who is only a saint of the Great Path, could defeat her with a piece of bread. Buzz, Duchess Yunlan appeared at Nethery's side. Looking at the gradually weakening aura of you, who originally had the temperament of a female tyrant, gradually turning into the familiar you who didn't like to speak, Duchess Yunlan narrowed her eyes. As Yu's protector, she didn't have much hope for you. She never thought that you would give her such a big surprise. You had earned her a lot of face. Duchess Nightmare looked at you in surprise, and the look in her eyes was somewhat complicated. She couldn't believe that the weakest cursed goddess had crushed Soul because of a piece of bread. However, no matter what, the original crisis situation was completely stabilized. The biggest problem now was the army of soul demons in front of them. The army from the soul demon universe was the most difficult to deal with. 3 Sin great soul overlords and half of the soul demon army, which had been killed by the dark cuisine, were still alive. Even the 3 dukes felt rather serious. Soul's mind was a little confused. Gluttony great soul overlord supported her body. Wake up. You've only lost one match. The throne of Void City will definitely belong to you. This is the will of the Soul God. Gluttony great soul overlord said. Soul's mind was much clearer now, and her eyes were much brighter. That's right. Her goal was to sit on the throne of Void City. She wanted to welcome the Soul God's awakening and arrival with a noble identity. So, how could she lose confidence just because of one defeat? Soul's eyes became sharp again. The 3 great soul overlords stood behind her, their auras merging into one. Yes, Soul knew very well that even though she was defeated, the throne of Void City still belonged to her. Because she was not alone. Behind her stood the entire soul demon universe. She had the army of soul demons and the great soul overlords supporting her. These were things that you, who had won by trickery, did not have. The army of soul demons and the army of the exiles whose wills were controlled. Even though the army of the nobles of Void City had returned to the dukes, it was still no match for the army behind Soul. The difference in numbers was too great. The army of exiles was still manageable, but the army of soul demons was really terrifying. Don't be so wishy-washy. Just crush them and destroy them. Envy great soul overlord took a step forward and roared. The next moment, the power of sin exploded out of his body, which was as thin as a bamboo pole. However, on the opposite side of him, Lord Go raised his dog paw, causing Envy great soul overlord's aura to stagnate. After all, the paw had left a deep impression on him. Hades' era also raised the golden spicy strip in his hand. The corner of Greed great soul overlord's mouth twitched. Fight! Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's face was cold. He suddenly opened his mouth and gave the order. The army of soul demons behind him charged out again. This time, without Bufang's dark cuisine, who else could stop the army of soul demons? The nobles of Void City did not expect the army of soul demons to appear with such means. Otherwise, given enough time, they could have built a line of defense to resist the army. The moment the war broke out, the army of nobles of Void City clashed with the army of soul demons. The war was destined to be tragic. The sky darkened, and a terrible murderous aura filled the sky. The buildings of Void City collapsed, and the ground cracked. Every place had turned into a cruel battlefield. As for the high-end combatants, they started fighting one after another. The three great soul overlords began to fight each other desperately. A great soul overlord was very strong, not weaker than a duke. Even though Nethery had 4 duke-level experts on her side, they were not weak. However, he could only stall 3 great soul overlords. Huda landed in front of the restaurant. As Bufang sat on the ground, they came before Bufang. The battle in the sky was still ongoing. Xiao Bai was guarding Bufang. Some soul demons who crossed the line of defense and attacked Bufang had their heads crushed by Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai's fighting ability began to grow as he swallowed more souls, but he might not be as strong as a duke. However, when facing a duke, Xiao Bai was not afraid anymore. Perhaps it was Soul's order, or perhaps it was the 3 great soul overlords' hatred for chefs. More and more soul demons kept breaking through the line of defense and charging toward Bufang. They wanted to tear Bufang apart. Of course, these soul demons were all crushed by Xiao Bai in the end. In an instant, the battle had reached its climax. In fact, the army of Void City was retreating. After all, the fighting prowess of the soul demons was too strong. They were not easy to kill and could be resurrected easily. This was the characteristic of the soul demons. Unless they cooked dark cuisine like Bufang, they would not be able to do it. However, dark cuisine was also a technical skill, and it was not something that ordinary people could cook. The nobles of Void City were not united to begin with. Some of them found that the situation was not good in the middle of the battle, so they chose to flee. So soon, the army of Void City was routed. Apart from the high-end combatants who were still fighting, Void City suffered a crushing defeat in the confrontation between the armies. At the same time, the top-grade soul overlords who had their hands and feet free joined the battle of the high-level experts. This doubled the pressure on the Duke. Rumble! Duchess Nightmare's face darkened. She glanced around and found that the army of soul demons was wreaking havoc. She was besieged by several top soul overlords and under the pressure of Gluttony Soul Overlord. For a moment there were signs of defeat. Of course, it was also because the battle with Duchess Tianlian had weakened them. Bam! The countless soul demons smashed Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan to the ground. They retreated quickly and retreated into the restaurant. After fighting off 2 great soul overlords, Lord Go and Hades Era also retreated. With the death spicy strip dangling from the corner of his mouth, Hades Era narrowed his eyes. Bufang, young man, this battle won't be easy. We don't have enough people. Without your dark cuisine, these soul demons are not easy to deal with. The more we kill, the more they come. Hades Era looked at Bufang. Sure enough, chefs were the nemesis of soul demons. All the nobles had fled. Only a few acquaintances were left in front of the restaurant. Bufang rose to his feet and patted the dust off his clothes. Then, he led the crowd into the restaurant and closed the door. Rumble! With that, the restaurant door was closed as if it was isolated from the noise and the war. Inside the restaurant, everyone's spirits were a little low. Although Nethery had defeated Soul, it did not make any difference. Soul's trump cards and forces were too strong. With the entire Soul Demon universe as her backing, there was basically no chance of her losing. Marquis Langgu and the others were covered with wounds. Viscount Ash's face was pale. She had almost exhausted all her energy. Master Jin Yong, on the other hand, had a bitter look on his face. He had thrown out all his stock of pills. However, the situation was getting more and more critical. The soul demons had surrounded the restaurant. The great soul overlord's laughter rang out in the sky. These fellows can only be cowards now. Beat them all and flatten this restaurant. Gluttony great soul overlord's roar echoed through the sky. Then, he took the initiative to strike. Monstrous power of sin surged as he threw out a palm. The palm was extremely huge. It fell from the sky and smashed over the restaurant. It was going to flatten the restaurant. Boom. However, the ground around the restaurant exploded. However, the restaurant, which had suffered a powerful attack, was unscathed. The people in the restaurant were amazed. Even the two dukes were very curious. Is the Queen of Curses really not going to make a move? Void City is already in a mess. Inside the restaurant, Bu Fong was holding a cup of hot tea and sipping it unhurriedly. Nourished by the tea, his spirit sea was slowly recovering. The Queen will strike when it's time, Duchess Nightmare said with a cold face. Something must have happened to the Queen of Curses. Bu Fong shook his head. Looking at Duchess Nightmare, who was trying her best to protect the Queen, he did not say anything. It was not a good idea to pin his hopes on the Queen, who did not know what was going on. It seemed that he had to rely on himself. Boom! The restaurant suffered another heavy blow. The power of the three great soul overlords attacking at the same time was almost enough to turn Void City upside down. However, they still failed to break the restaurant. The restaurant provided by the system had an outstanding defense. Bu Fong had known this for a long time. But the others did not. Although the restaurant had withstood the attacks of the great soul overlords over and over again, it had not been able to withstand the attack. What if the restaurant could not withstand the attacks and exploded with a loud bang? The people were very anxious. However, Bu Fong was still very calm. He lay back in his chair, held a teacup, and sipped the turquoise tea. He drank the tea and ate the oyster pancake. When the last sip of tea was finished, Bu Fong slowly rose from his chair. Boom! The restaurant shook violently again, and the ground around it cracked in an instant. Bu Fong breathed a sigh of relief. His eyes narrowed slightly. With a shake of his hand, a menu appeared in front of him. The menu glowed with a golden light. Well, it's time to call for backup, launch a counterattack. Chapter 1770. Reinforcements? You're just a chef. What kind of reinforcements can you call? Could it be that he could summon a powerful army? The hourglass of time and space was a divine artifact of the universe, a top-notch consumable, and it could only be used once. If the Soul Demon universe had not wanted to help Soul sit on the throne of Void City, it might not have used it at all. He had twisted time and space and summoned a powerful army of soul demons. So, what kind of reinforcements could Bu Fong call for? Many people in the restaurant were a little confused. However, Marquis Langgu and the others were very confident in Bu Fong, mainly because Bu Fong had created too many miracles. Weren't Lord Go and Hades era the reinforcements Bu Fong had called for? Lord Go glanced at Bu Fong. When he saw Bu Fong take out the golden recipe, his face froze. It looked like Bu Fong was going to cook the dish in the recipe. Was he going to summon Heaven God Destruction? Lord Go could not help but feel a little excited. Of the 5 heaven gods of the chaotic universe, except for Heaven God Transmigration, who had fled to the Soul Demon universe, only he and Era had awakened. Heaven God Destruction and Heaven God Space had not returned yet. However, when the Temple of Heaven God Destruction appeared, Lord Go guessed that Heaven God Destruction was about to return. As for when he would return, it would depend on when Bu Fong cooked the dish. Therefore, when Bu Fong said he was going to call for reinforcements, Lord Go believed him the most. Outside the restaurant, the rumbling continued. The soul demons, on the other hand, were enjoying themselves. They kept attacking the restaurant. However, the restaurant did not budge. Its defense was not something those soul demons could break. Bufang lifted the curtain, turned, and went into the kitchen. Then, he began to cook at a steady pace. At this moment, the trembling of the restaurant had almost disappeared. In the kitchen, Bufang took out the golden recipe. Golden light flowed on the menu. It was the aura of the god of cooking's menu, and Bufang was very familiar with it. According to Lord Go's recipe, sweet and sour ribs was cooked. Era's recipe turned out to be spicy strip. He wondered, what kind of delicacy would be cooked from this page of recipes? Heavenly destruction god, it should be a very domineering existence, right? A gigantic existence that could destroy the heavens with a single bite, destroy the earth with a single kick, and shatter the stars with a single tail. Bufang imagined heavenly destruction god's appearance in his mind. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly as he shook his head. To be honest, Bufang was quite curious about the heavenly destruction god. Among the 5 great Empyrean gods, the one with the strongest destructive power was naturally the Empyrean god of destruction. The latter symbolized destruction and had mastered the ultimate law, the law of destruction. This also meant that the other party's destructive power was unparalleled. Bufang didn't start cooking immediately. He leaned against the stove and closed his eyes. He began to simulate the cooking method of the dishes recorded on the menu in his spirit sea. Time was ticking away slowly. The dishes in the god of cooking's menu were amazing. Even Bufang could not guess what he was going to cook unless he did it himself. He had to simulate the cooking method in his spirit sea and make sure it was correct before he began to cook. It took a lot of energy to simulate the process. Fortunately, although Bufang had exhausted his mental force fighting the army of soul demons, his mental force had recovered a lot. But now it had recovered a lot. It should not be too difficult to cook this dish. Bufang closed his eyes. The kitchen was very quiet. Slowly, the energy continuously flowed around. Outside the restaurant, the roars of the soul demons rang out incessantly. However, it did not seem to be as noisy as before. Duchess Yunlan and Duchess Nightmare frowned. Through the window, they could see that many soul demons seemed to have left the vicinity of the restaurant and were flying toward the distance. Damn it! They're going to the Queen's palace, Duchess Nightmare said, her pupils constricting. We're hiding here, but Soul can't wait to inherit the throne, Duchess Yunlan sighed. Although the restaurant's defense was invincible, it not only blocked the soul demons, but it also bound them here. Duchess Yunlan and Duchess Nightmare looked at each other and saw the grave look in each other's eyes. The Queen's palace was the most important place in Void City, and the soul demons must not be allowed to set foot in it. As dukes, they had the responsibility and obligation to guard that holy place. Therefore, both of their eyes were filled with determination. After that, they stepped out of the restaurant. Outside, some soul demons roared and flew toward them. In the hands of the 2 dukes, these soul demons were as fragile as ants. It was easily obliterated and crushed. Lord Go and Hades' era did not go out. Hutu and Yu were also left behind by Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan. The main reason was that they did not want to put the 2 cursed goddesses in danger. The moment the 2 dukes walked out of the restaurant, they attracted the attention of the soul demons. A swarm of soul demons came chasing after them. Hovering in midair, Envy Great Soul Overlord led an army to stop the 2 dukes. A Great Soul Overlord was no weaker than a duke. And in the soul demon universe, there were 6 such Great Soul Overlords. In fact, among them, the top Great Soul Overlords were so strong that they were almost as strong as Soul God. They were not existences that dukes could resist. This was also why the soul demon universe could be so fearsome. In many universes, the soul demon universe and the primitive universe were both top universes. When the top chaotic saint-level experts collided, the 2 universes could not do anything to each other. Therefore, as long as Void City was the factor that broke the balance, the soul demon universe would not be able to do anything to the other. While holding the primitive universe back, the Soul Demon universe was still able to send 3 great soul overlords to Void City. This showed that the Soul Demon universe had the upper hand in the confrontation. Bam! Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan fought the great soul overlord in midair. Duchess Yunlan became serious. She swung her arms and legs, causing terrifying air waves to swirl in the sky. Many soul demons were turned into corpses under the impact of the energy. Duchess Nightmare sped away toward the Queen of Curse's palace. The importance of the palace was self-evident, so she had to protect it. Duchess Yunlan alone stopped Envy Great Soul Overlord and even faced the army of soul demons. She was at a disadvantage, suppressed by so many soul demons, and seemed to be out of breath. But she still tried her best to hold on and resist all this. In the restaurant, the atmosphere was somewhat stagnant. Marquis Langu and the others hesitated for a long time. Their auras were weak, mainly because they had consumed too much energy in the previous battle. But now that Void City was in danger, how could they just sit back and do nothing? After hesitating for a long time, Marquis Langu and the others charged out and fought the many soul demons. Tens of thousands of soul demons engulfed them in an instant. Although they were stronger than a single soul demon, there were too many of them. They were completely suppressed. In the restaurant, Bufang finally opened his eyes. White smoke rose from the top of his head. It was the smoke formed when his spirit sea was operating at a high speed. Bufang's eyes flashed. He shook his hand. The dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand and began to spin. After hundreds of simulations, Bufang had finally completed one, and he was now more confident than ever. Buzz, one ingredient after another flew out of the kitchen. Following an intuition, he began to cook. Bufang's eyes were as calm as still water. A whole piece of fat meat emerged. It was the meat of a top Great Soul Overlord, the ingredient that Pride Great Soul Overlord had transformed into. The ingredient of this level was just right for this dish. It was just right for summoning Heaven God Destruction with this level of ingredient. Holding the dragon bone kitchen knife in one hand, Bufang quickly cut the meat on the chopping board. The meat was minced and diced. It was scattered on the chopping board. Some spirit herbs and spiritual ingredients were also cut into pieces by Bufang. Not only that, but Bufang also took a piece of soul overlord meat that was stained with bones and diced the bones. Even the bones were chopped into small pieces. Then, he added other ingredients into the meat and poured them into the wok of oil. Then, he began to fry. Sizzle! Bufang tossed the wok, causing the ingredients in it to tumble. Oil splashed everywhere. The golden oil reflected a myriad of splendors under the light. It did not look like he was cooking with top ingredient. Instead, it looked like he was cooking with ingredients that had been plopped to the extreme. Sizzle! With a sweep of the Chilan transmigration ladle, the ingredients that had piled up in the wok scattered. Then, he sprinkled some sauce on them, making the color of the dish a little darker. The rich aroma of meat and vegetables wafted out and lingered in people's noses. Bufang was not satisfied with his movements. Soon, the dishes were out of the wok, poured into blue and white porcelain bowls, and stacked together. In fact, at this moment, Bufang still did not know what he was going to cook. However, he should have a rough idea in his mind. When he took out the ingredients that had been cut hundreds of thousands of times and turned into a large pile of meat paste, Bufang's mind seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. According to the records and descriptions in the recipe, Bufang used the meat paste to wrap the stir-fried ingredients as if he was making dumplings. Divine seal dumplings? Bufang shook his head. It was not a divine seal dumpling. Because, as the meat paste was kneaded into a ball, the corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Because what he had made was a meatball. At this moment, Bufang's mind was getting clearer and clearer. Soul Overlord meatball? It was fundamentally different from the cooking of soul demon meatballs. But what Bufang could be sure of was that this thing was a soul demon meatball. One meatball after another appeared and rolled on the stove. Each meatball seemed to be restless, and there was a majestic energy surging in it. Gurgle, gurgle, Bu Fong poured oil into the black turtle constellation wok, which was mixed with the law of destruction. Wisps of the law of destruction swam in the wok, making it look as if there were dragons swimming in the wok. Bu Fong put the kneaded meatball into the wok. The law of destruction immediately rushed up and wrapped the meatball. Gurgle, the surface of the meatball began to turn golden, and the meat gradually stiffened. A rich meaty aroma wafted out of it. The aroma seemed to penetrate deep into the soul. Bu Fong's eyes lit up. In the previous God of Cooking's menu, these dishes were cooked with bowls. However, this time, the God of Cooking's menu was cooked with baskets. Looking at the basket of fried golden soul demon meatballs, Bu Fong did not know what to say. At this moment, Bu Fong seemed to have become a noob. This heavenly snake of destruction. Could it be swish? Small holes appeared on the Qilin transmigration ladle, and the golden soul demon meatball rolled out. The oil was still boiling restlessly on the meatball. In the restaurant, an aroma wafted out of the kitchen. It was the aroma of fried food. It was especially alluring, and it made one's stomach uncontrollably hungry. Hudu Yu and the others were puzzled. They did not know what Bu Fong was cooking at this time. Didn't he say he was going to call for backup? Where is the backup? In Yu's arms. Little Hu was twisting restlessly, and her fur began to turn blood red. Her eyes were watery, and her little paws were clutching her head as if something was calling her in the depths of her mind. Little Hu covered her face with her paws. What's wrong with me? Can't you be more reserved? Don't be so impulsive when you smell the aroma of food. You have to control yourself. Little Hu's tail was wagging. Suddenly, a bell rang out of the restaurant. The curtain of the kitchen was lifted. A thin figure walked out of the kitchen. In Yu's arms, Little Hu's eyes lit up. In a flash, she turned into a beam of light and sped toward the figure who had just walked out of the kitchen. Chapter 1771. Boom. The huge city wall collapsed with a rumble. Countless wisps of curse power swirled in the broken bricks and stones. Greed Great Soul Overlord scorpion hooks swept the wall slightly and brought it down. Behind the wall was a majestic palace, and in front of it was a statue. There were few people in this place. Only the guards of the Queen of Curses palace were still fighting bravely. The statue was of a graceful, supreme, and majestic figure. It was draped in a veil and wrapped around its jade-like feet. Its eyes were so lifelike that they seemed to be able to see through the universe with a glance and break the cycle of reincarnation with a single thought. Although it was just a statue, the pressure and energy it exuded were unparalleled. This statue was the Queen of Curses. She was the ruler of Void City, the supreme chaos god of the Void Universe. In the distance, cursed goddess Soul looked at the statue with a complicated expression. She was a little frightened. She was an existence that surpassed a duke and stood at the peak of the universe. Soul did not know if what she was doing was treason, but she knew that what she was doing now was rebelling against the Queen of Curses. However, she was actually comforting herself in her heart. After all, the Queen of Curses had not appeared for a long time. Even if she did, it was only through voice transmission. The arrival of the army of soul demons gave Soul courage. Perhaps something had happened to the Queen. Otherwise, why was the Queen of Curses looking for an heir? All she had done was to sit on the throne that belonged to her. The pressure emanating from the statue was extremely terrible. That pressure was enough to make people shiver. The statue was huge, towering into the clouds and tens of thousands of feet tall. It was made of a kind of meteorite and possessed supreme power. The curse power seemed to be wrapped around it bit by bit. An existence like the Queen of Curses should be immortal. Why was she looking for an heir? Soul knew very well that the search for a successor would only be done when one was on the verge of death or about to leave this world. And now, the Queen of Curses was doing this. The more Soul thought about it, the less ashamed and conflicted she felt. The throne of Void City belonged to her, and she would be the one sitting on it. She would also be the heir of the cursed woman. She was just making the process faster. Rumble. The closer they got to the Queen of Curses' palace, the heavens and earth became increasingly gloomy as a terrifying aura filled the air. Greed Great Soul Overlord narrowed his eyes. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord grinned. Behind him was an army of soul demons that blotted out the sky. The aura of these soul demons was so strong that it seemed to make Void City tremble violently. Boom! The army of soul demons swarmed in. The guards in front of the Queen of Curses' palace roared and resisted. They were all female soldiers, and their cultivation bases were not weak. One of them was a chaotic saint with red eyes. Cursed Goddess Soul! How dare you! You are not the ruler of Void City yet. How dare you invade the Queen of Curses' palace? The leader of the Queen of Curses' guards yelled. He held a silver spear in his hand. The red tassel on the spear fluttered in the wind, giving off a terrifying aura. It was a woman with silver hair. She had been responsible for guarding the Queen's palace for generations. Cursed Goddess Soul said nothing. Her eyes were dark and cold. Now that things had come to this, there was nothing more to say. She could only sit on the throne of Void City. Behind Soul, Greed Great Soul Overlord moved in a flash. His body suddenly grew to 10,000 feet tall, and with a step, he stepped into the square. He glanced at the statue with some fear, then his eyes gleamed fiercely. The Queen of Curses? She can't save you anymore. Rumble. Greed Great Soul Overlord was a Duke-level expert, and he had all the weapons he was given. This made their fighting prowess soar. Greed Great Soul Overlord's scorpion tail came smashing down. The guards resisted with all their might, but the moment they were struck by the scorpion tail, the moment they were hit, they bled from their 7 orifices, and their minds were destroyed. The power of sin polluted their minds, causing them to vomit blood and die. Greed Great Soul Overlord was too strong. No one could resist him unless they were Duke-level experts. Moreover, at this moment, there were 2 Great Soul Overlords in Soul's camp. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord was even more direct. He opened his mouth and sucked. Many experts of Void City simply could not resist the suction and were sucked directly into Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's mouth. In an instant there were countless casualties. The 2 Great Soul Overlords opened the way. The Queen of Curses guards couldn't stop them. The silver-haired woman holding the silver spear roared. The spear tore through the sky like a silver dragon. A spear swept out and fiercely stabbed out. Kill! Those who dare to invade the Queen's palace shall be killed without mercy. The woman let out a long shout. In the distance, Duchess Nightmare flew over. His terrifying aura collided head-on with Greed Great Soul Overlord's barbs. Boom! Many of Greed Great Soul Overlord's barbs were torn apart. Duchess Nightmare also crashed to the ground. The silver-haired woman was fighting Gluttony Great Soul Overlord. Her aura was powerful. She seemed to have ignited the power of her curse to strengthen herself. He was actually suppressing Gluttony Great Soul Overlord. She nodded at the Nightmare Duke. There was sadness in Duchess Nightmare's eyes. The silver-haired woman had used her death to show her determination. She wanted to use her life to protect the Queen's palace. Boom! The ground shook and collapsed. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord and the silver-haired woman fought fiercely. The whole of Void City was shaking because of the battle. Duchess Nightmare, on the other hand, was filled with killing intent as she charged toward Gluttony Great Soul Overlord. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's stomach was pierced by the silver-haired woman, and the power of her curse kept corroding the wound. He roared. His eyes were scarlet. Countless soul demons piled up, and the guards fell one after another. The Queen's statue was shaking under the impact. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord grabbed the silver-haired woman's neck with one hand and rushed to the top of the statue. Boom! The silver-haired woman was pressed hard against the statue's forehead. With a thud, the statue was instantly covered with crack. The silver-haired woman kept roaring. She kept stabbing the spear at Gluttony, great soul overlord. You want to die? I'll fulfill your wish. You and your queen's statue will die together. Gluttony, great soul overlord's eyes gleamed fiercely. Rumble. The silver-haired woman's body was smashed hard against the statue. The huge statue finally could not bear it anymore. It began to crack. The head of the statue was directly smashed into pieces. The silver-haired woman's eyes were lifeless. Her mind seemed to be torn apart. In the distance, Duchess Nightmare's killing intent soared. However, her body was overwhelmed by countless soul demons, and she could not spare a hand to save the silver-haired woman. Darkness. It was as if darkness had really descended on Void City, enveloping the whole city in despair. In the restaurant. The moment Bufang walked out of the kitchen, he paused slightly. Little Hu had turned into a stream of light and shot in front of Bufang. The latter hovered in midair. His blood-colored hair fluttered as if it was being blown by a gust of wind. Little Hu stared at the big basket in Bufang's hand with his big, watery eyes. Inside the basket was actually a basket full of golden meatballs. A rich meaty aroma wafted out of the meatballs in the restaurant. Hutu, you, and the others all felt a little strange. Owner Bu, where are the reinforcements you found? Xiao Ai's eyes widened. She looked behind Bufang, but she did not see any reinforcements at all. So, what did Bufang do after working so hard for so long? Did he just make a basket of meatballs? What could these meatballs do? Could they kill soul demons? Bufang glanced at Xiao Ai. Sure enough, intelligence is proportional to the amount of breasts you have. In the distance, Hutu did not raise any questions. Well, neither did you. Don't worry, Bufang said faintly. Then, Bufang turned his eyes to Little Hu in front of him. The latter's curiosity and desire toward the golden soul meatball made Bufang's heart skip a beat. Of course, this idea was a little bold, but in the distance, Lord Go narrowed his eyes. He naturally saw Little Hu's strange look, but he frowned and shook his head. Impossible, Lord Go had personally tested this Little Hu, and the Little Hu could not sense the law of destruction at all. How could it be Heaven God destruction? Did he have to use Bufang's food to summon the Heaven God back? Suddenly, Lord Go was a little uncertain. Hades' era held a spicy strip between his lips. Could this Little Hu be Heaven God destruction? His expression was very strange. He, the noble Heaven God of life, Hades' era, was actually on the same level as a fox? Bufang rubbed Little Hu's head. He would soon know whether he was Heaven God destruction or not. There was no hurry now. Foxy jumped onto Bufang's shoulder, drooling so much that it almost formed a river. She was very eager, a desire that came from the depths of her soul. In the distance, Xiaopi lay on Xiao Bai's head, calmly blowing bubbles. Bufang reached out his hand, grabbed a scalding golden soul meatball, and gave it to Little Hu. Little Hu opened his mouth wide and swallowed the golden soul meatball in one gulp. Buzz, the moment he swallowed the meatball, Little Hu's body burst out with countless rays of light, which seemed to shoot up to the sky. Then the light faded. Little Hu stuck out his tongue, licked his lips, and burped. Everything seemed as if nothing had happened. Lord Go's eyes widened. You and the others also watched curiously. Hades' era held the spicy strip between his lips, which almost fell to the ground. Is this Little Hu the Heaven God destruction? Since you've eaten the meatball, why don't you do something? For example, transform? Little Hu excitedly ran around on Bufang's shoulder. Then, he looked eagerly at Bufang as if he wanted more. Bufang looked at Little Hu, who didn't change at all, and frowned slightly. Well, it seems that you're not the Heaven God destruction. You're just a glutton. Bufang shook his head in disappointment. Who was this mysterious Heaven God destruction? Since you're not the Heaven God destruction, don't eat it. These are for the Heaven God. Bufang said. After that, he refused Little Hu's eager gaze. Little Hu froze. The next moment, his body suddenly burst out with a dazzling light. There was a loud bang. Like a golden stream of light, he rushed out of the restaurant. Everyone couldn't help but be stunned. What happened? Bufang and the others followed him out. Little Hu rushed out of the restaurant and floated in the air. Then, his petite body hovered in midair, facing the army of soul demons outside. Half of the soul demon army had retreated to attack the Queen of Curse's palace. However, most of them were still left to flatten the restaurant. Duchess Yunlan and Envy Great Soul Overlord fought until the sky darkened. Many soul demons kept attacking the restaurant. Suddenly, the soul demons froze. Because in the sky, the small blood-colored fox flew into the void of space. The soul demons froze for a moment. Then, they roared one after another. One after another, they rushed into the clouds and went straight toward Little Hu. They wanted to tear Little Hu to pieces. Kill! The soul demons roared. In front of the restaurant, Bufang and the others watched curiously. Hovering in midair, Foxy looked at the thousands of soul demons charging at her. The next moment, she let out a shrill cry, followed by her shrill scream. In the sky above Void City, a huge cloud vortex emerged. The power of destruction swirled in it. The blood-colored fur on Little Hu's body turned golden. Golden light swirled around him. It turned Little Hu into a golden fox. Then Little Hu opened her mouth at the thousands of soul demons. A golden soul orb slowly drifted out, wrapped in the power of destruction. Boom! It sounded like a huge cannon. The golden soul meatball turned into a beam of light and shot whistling toward the thousands of soul demons. In a flash, it fell into the middle of the soul demons. Then it exploded. The sky suddenly turned golden. At this moment, thousands of soul demons were devoured and melted by countless beams of golden light. The power of destruction was crushing them. In midair, a golden fox with golden fur waved in the wind. Little Hu hovered proudly in midair. That's right. I'm Heaven God Destruction. I speak for myself. Chapter 1772. An aura of destruction towered into the sky and shook the earth. Hovering in midair, Little Hu raised his 9 tails, which burst into dazzling golden light and swept across the sky, shocking everything. A golden meatball smashed into the crowd of soul demons and exploded in an instant. In just a flash, everything seemed to have been wiped out. A wave of destruction spread through heaven and earth, turning the thousands of soul demons who were chasing Little Hu into nothingness. The terrible energy made it impossible for those soul demons to react. Even the soul demons, who were at the level of saints of the Great Path, were shattered into pieces by the law of destruction. Countless souls drifted in midair. These were the true forms of soul demons, similar to the souls of human experts. In midair, Xiao Bai was in high spirits. Yes, she was Heaven God Destruction. Would Bufang still give her the golden meatball now? In front of the restaurant, everyone was dumbfounded. Xiao Ai, standing next to you, was so shocked that her eyes were about to pop out. Is that still Little Hu? That fox that only knew how to act cute actually had such a terrifying destructive power? Even Hudu sucked in her breath in shock. There were also 9-tailed demon foxes in the primitive universe, but they were not at the same level as this Little Hu. With just 1 meatball, this Little Hu had killed thousands of soul demons. His strength was almost comparable to that of a real almighty expert of the primitive universe. Lord Go and Hades' era were somewhat speechless. It really is this Little Hu. Hades' era sucked on the spicy strip between his lips. Now, the wise and mighty Hades' era is really at the same level as this Little Hu. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. Although it was beyond his expectation that Little Hu was Heaven God Destruction, it did not surprise him much. After all, if Hades' era could be Heaven God Life, what else was impossible? Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. At least, the heavenly destruction god had returned. Sky god of destruction was equivalent to a duke. Now, there was a chance that Bufang could turn the tables. Although it was just one more duke-level powerhouse, it wasn't a big deal. But the difference between them was huge. After all, a duke was an existence that stood at the pinnacle of the universe. Every single one of them could turn the tides of the battle. It was an inconceivable existence. In the void, in the distance, Envy Great Soul Overlord, who was fighting Duchess Yunlan, was shocked. He abruptly turned to look at her. He saw the scene of the little who killing thousands of soul demons with just a spit of phlegm. The corner of his mouth trembled as he was startled. What was going on? This fox, how did it become so strong? Duchess Yunlan saw it, but unlike Envy Great Soul Overlord, she was excited. This way, you and the others will have another chance. In front of the restaurant, Xiao Ai glanced at Bufang. Owner Bu, you said to call for backup, but little who doesn't count as backup. Where is the backup you mentioned? Xiao Ai glared at him. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He glanced at Xiao Ai. Why are you so calculative? No one will marry such a calculative girl. Did Bufang not care about his face? He did not know that little who was heaven god destruction. You pursed her lips and smiled, as if it was rare to see Bufang suffer a setback. Your Excellency Nethery, Xiao Ai is right. Little who doesn't count as backup. Little who has been fighting all the time. Xiao Ai gritted her teeth and said, You're right. You shook her head. Bufang rolled his eyes. You want backup, right? With a thought, Bufang's mind immediately went into the heaven and earth farmland. The sky was vast and the fields were vast. When the wind blew, one could see Nyo Han-san. Bufang landed in the heaven and earth farmland. Currently, the heaven and earth farmland was too prosperous, and the number of living creatures in it was uncountable. In the center of the heaven and earth farmland, Nyo Han-san was lying on a chair, snoring. Recently, there was nothing to study, and Bufang did not come to find him. It was rare for him to be so relaxed. In the distance, Bufang's apprentices were cultivating hard in the heaven and earth farmland, constantly exchanging their cooking experiences. Xiao Xiaolong, Yu Fu, Yang Meiji, and Sorceress and Sheng, the four apprentices. Many apprentices were sitting in front of the wooden hut, exchanging their cooking experiences. Bufang was a very unreliable head chef. He left them behind and wandered. In fact, he did not teach them anything. However, the knowledge Bufang had left behind before he left was enough for them to fully comprehend. Nyo Han-san was snoring in the distance. Bufang's apprentices were very familiar with him. Occasionally, they would come to the heaven and earth farmland to ask him for ingredient. Of course, the ingredients in the heaven and earth farmland were not ordinary. Today, Bufang's apprentices were already the top experts in the Hidden Dragon continent or their respective areas. Even the weakest Xiao Xiaolong now, he had reached the God Emperor level. After all, as Bufang's strength increased, the apprentices who came to the heaven and earth farmland every day to eat the treasures of heaven and earth also benefited from it. Boom! Nyo Han-san, who was snoring, suddenly opened his eyes. Then, he sat up from the wooden chair, as if he had the last radiance of a setting sun. This startled the group of apprentices who were exchanging their experiences. Owner Bu is here. Nyo Han-san wiped the drool from the corner of his mouth, hurriedly saying. The apprentices were bewildered. Then, they were wild with joy. They had not seen Bufang for a long time. In the distance, not far from the wooden hut, among the spirit herbs, wearing the vermilion robe, Bufang slowly walked over with his hands clasped. After so many years, Bufang's appearance had not changed much. Thus, the apprentices recognized Bufang immediately. Owner Bu! Bufang's apprentices shouted in a high-pitched voice. There were only 4 apprentices present. After all, they could not stay in the heaven and earth farmland all the time. Seeing Bufang, they were pleasantly surprised. Bufang's face was calm. Stepping on the air, He arrived in front of the wooden hut in a short while. What a coincidence! You're all here, Bufang said. Nyo Han-san got up with a smile on his face. Owner Bu, are we going to do some hybridization again? Leave everything to this old bull. Nyo Han-san said, his eyes bright. Bufang gave Nyo Han-san a meaningful look. However, today, Bufang's purpose was not to find them. Bufang looked at the apprentices. Are you guys free? Bufang looked at the apprentices and said. Xiao Xiaolong and the others nodded hurriedly. I'm too free. Owner Bu, I'm already standing at the peak of the hidden dragon continent. I'm so lonely. Xiao Xiaolong shook his head. With his current cultivation base, he was invincible in the hidden dragon continent. Yu Fu's talent was even better. After all, she used to be the queen of the Serpentmen city. As for Yang Meiji and Sorceress and Xing, their cultivation bases were also very strong. Would he meet 4 apprentices from the hidden dragon continent? The days in the hidden dragon continent were Bufang's happy days. It's good that you're free. Come with me. Let's do something, Bufang said. It's a good chance to test your cooking skills. Xiao Xiaolong's eyes lit up when he heard that they were going to test his cooking skills. He still remembered the fear of being dominated by Bufang. Every time they tested his cooking skills, he couldn't beat Yu Fu and was punished by Bufang for a long time. Come. Owner Bu, my kitchen knife has been thirsty for a long time. Xiao Xiaolong's beautiful face blushed. Well, do you know how to cook dark cuisine? Bufang asked after thinking for a while. Xiao Xiaolong was speechless. He ignored the 4 confused apprentices. Bufang left the farmland with the 4 apprentices. Nyo Han-san followed them. He had not left the farmland for a long time, and it was a good time to see the world. Nyo Han-san carried a huge bamboo basket on his back. Then, he eagerly followed behind Bufang. The group left the Heaven and Earth farmland. In Void City, District A, in front of the god of cooking little restaurant, Xiao Ai stared at Bufang, who was in a daze. Does he think he can hide the fact that he didn't call for backup by being in a daze? Suddenly Bufang rolled his eyes. Then, he glanced at Xiao Ai, who was stiffening her neck. The next moment, he snapped his fingers. White dots of light emerged in an instant. Slowly, 5 silhouettes emerged from within. Xiao Ai stared blankly at the 5 people who had appeared behind Bufang. 4 women and a wretched Nyonyo? Wait. No, there seems to be a man. The moment the teleportation ended, Xiao Xiaolong's heart surged. Owner Bu, you want us to join the battle? I, Xiao Xiaolong, am invincible in this world with my current strength. Owner Bu, I'm not bragging. It's nothing even if I rush out of the universe, Xiao Xiaolong said triumphantly. Yu Fu, Yang Meiji, and Xing and the others were curiously observing their surroundings. Yu paused slightly when she saw them. They were all acquaintances. You, Sister Xiao. Xiao Xiaolong's eyes lit up when he saw you. You nodded. She seemed to understand what Bufang was going to do. They were all Bufang's apprentices. Although their cooking skills might not be as good as Bufang's, they were among the top chefs in the world today. One Bufang could deal with tens of thousands of soul demons, let alone so many chefs. Owner Bu. These reinforcements are so weak. Even I can fight 10 of them with one hand. Xiao Ai frowned as she looked at Xiao Xiaolong and the others. She was a peak god emperor. In this battle, he was nothing more than a fart. What was the use of these people who were weaker than her? Only Nyo Han-san was slightly stronger. He was a peak god emperor. As for the others, they were all at the level of ordinary god emperors. Any soul demon at the level of a saint of the Great Path was enough to destroy them. Bufang glanced at Xiao Ai. This little girl really doesn't know how terrifying chefs are. They are all my apprentices. Don't worry, they are strong enough to deal with soul demons, said Bufang. Xiao Ai paused. Apprentices? Xiao Ai was stunned. A restaurant apprentice? Buzz then, Bufang raised his hand. Divine power liquid droplets appeared in his palm. They looked just like the god of cooking's divine power liquid drops. Bufang flicked his fingers. The droplet was divided into 4 and distributed to each acolyte. Xiao Xiaolong held them. He was in high spirits, but now he was dumbfounded. What is this place? A huge, terrifying, and oppressive city, and a starry sky that stretches as far as the eye can see. The pressure in the air caused him to shiver. And in the distance there were hordes of black monsters, every single one of them could crush him. Damn it! Why did I, the mighty little dragon god emperor of the hidden dragon continent, become a weakling here? Has the world become so terrible? However, holding Bufang's god of cooking's liquid drops, Xiao Xiaolong felt unprecedentedly calm, as if he had found a harbor. Well, it's time to test you. You know how to cook dark cuisine, don't you? Bufang said. Like this. After that, Bufang shook his hand. His hand shook. Very quickly, he finished cooking a bowl of stargazy pie. A strong stench immediately filled the air. The faces of Xiao Xiaolong, Yu Fu, and the others turned a little black. They covered their mouths and almost threw up. Dark cuisine? The owner actually asked us to cook dark cuisine? This thing is really interesting. Looking at the nimble herring head, many apprentices could not help but sigh with emotion. Owner Bu is indeed Owner Bu. He can even cook dark cuisine with such spirituality. Yes, of course I can. Xiao Xiaolong's eyes lit up as he patted his chest and promised. As Bufang's apprentices, how could they not know dark cuisine? A dark cuisine was a piece of cake for them. It was as dark as they wanted it to be. Very good. Use your imagination. Let these soul demons feel despair. Bufang said. During the cooking process, fuse my divine power liquid drops into the dark cuisine. That way, your dark cuisine will turn into a powerful weapon. Go. Prepare well. Those soul demons in the distance are waiting for you. Bufang said, twitching the corner of his mouth. Xiao Xiaolong and the others nodded hurriedly, then took out their own kitchen utensils and began to cook. At their level, they had already used the top resources of their respective continents to create their own kitchen utensils. All of them did was to keep up with Bufang's pace. Niu Hansen rolled his eyes. He seemed to want to cook something as well. When it came to food, he might not be as good as Bufang and the others. However, dark cuisine, Niu Hansen raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled wickedly. Who's afraid of who? In front of the restaurant, the 4 apprentice chefs stood in an orderly manner. Spatulas flew, black pots rolled, and stoves rumbled. The 4 apprentices got into formation and began to cook at the same time. Lord Go and the others watched with great interest. They felt sad for the soul demons in the distance. One chef was enough to make them suffer so much that they wished they were dead. This group of chefs, they were probably going to destroy heaven and earth. Chapter 1773. To soul demons, chefs were simply nightmarish existences. To them, the food cooked by chefs was extremely disgusting. Perhaps the soul god's sense of taste had gone awry when he gave birth to soul demons. Dark cuisine, which humans found disgusting, was a supreme delicacy to soul demons. The point was, to soul demons, these disgusting dark cuisines were delicious and deadly. That was the scariest part. Therefore, the soul demons' disgust for chefs came from the bottom of their hearts. Dark cuisine was something that people would be scared of just by hearing its name. However, they could not resist the temptation of dark cuisine, which made them very uncomfortable. They felt pain and happiness at the same time, and then, conquered by the dark cuisine, they would die. Bufang said that he alone could match an army. If he had his apprentices, it would be a nightmare for the soul demons. In midair, a group of soul demons swooped down from the sky. Their eyes widened, and then they stopped moving and retreated like birds, startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. They all had lingering fears about dark cuisine. With dark cuisine, Bufang had single-handedly stopped an entire army of soul demons, fought against an army of 100,000, and even killed many of them. This time, although Bufang did not cook, the soul demons felt their hair stand on end. However, the row of chefs lined up in front of the restaurant made the soul demon's hair stand on end. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang walked calmly in front of the restaurant. He did not plan to cook this time. He had just cooked a dish from the God of Cooking's menu, and the energy in his spirit sea still needed to recover. He could make use of this opportunity to test his apprentices. Foxy landed on the ground. Now, Foxy had become golden and dazzling, turning into a noble golden fox. She landed on Bufang's shoulder and blinked her big, lively eyes. Bufang glanced at Little who was lying on his shoulder, and fell silent for a moment. He was silent for a long time, recalling the image of heaven god destruction he had imagined. He should be an overlord who could crush mountains and rivers with a stomp, shatter stars with a roar, and collapse the void with a flick of his tail. Then, he looked at Little who. For Bufang, the impact was enormous. Hotu Yu and the others gathered in front of the restaurant. The cooking of Xiao Xiaolong and the others also attracted their curiosity. Bufang's culinary skills were superb. What about his apprentices? His cooking skills shouldn't be bad either. Many people narrowed their eyes with curiosity. Holding Little who in his arms, Bufang sat on the stairs in front of the restaurant. He grabbed the golden soul meatballs from the basket and stuffed them into Little who's mouth. At the same time, he watched Xiao Xiaolong and the others cook. He was curious about what kind of dark cuisine his apprentices could come up with. You and the others now know what dark cuisine is, so they are all looking forward to it. Voila! Xiao Xiaolong took out a huge goat stomach. The latter rubbed his palms together. Using a kitchen knife to empty the goat's stomach, he imitated Bufang's technique and spun the kitchen knife. He took out a goat's internal organs and quickly cut them into pieces. These pieces, such as the goat's heart and the goat's liver, were all finely chopped. Xiao Xiaolong's eyes shone. When he cooked this dish, he was happy and excited. Which chef didn't have a demon in their heart? A chef who let go of himself was the scariest. Xiao Xiaolong's eyes shone. When he cooked this dish, he was happy and excited. At this moment, Xiao Xiaolong had let go of himself. The goat's stomach bulged as it was stuffed. After covering the goat's stomach, Xiao Xiaolong stretched out his palms. Energy was moving rapidly in his palms. Every time his palms hit the goat's stomach, it would shake unceasingly. Boom, boom, boom. Every loud sound was like a tremor that smashed into one's soul, causing one's heart to tremble with fear. What was he planning to do? Everyone's faces were strange. Even Bufang had a suspicious look on his face. Bufang was sure that he didn't teach Xiao Xiaolong such a dish. It must be a dish that Xiao Xiaolong came up with after he let go of himself. His apprentices had demons living in their hearts. Xiao Xiaolong opened the goat's stomach. He took out the spices. Not just spices but all kinds of seasonings. Sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, and spicy. He put all kinds of seasonings into the wok. On the other side, Xiao Xiaolong's black wok was still boiling the broth. It was a broth made from a goat leg. The milky broth was boiling, and seafood was added to it. A big piece of ginger was added to remove the mutton's odor. It was hard to associate such a rough and wild cooking method with Xiao Xiaolong's exquisite face. Sizzle! Sizzle! After opening the goat's stomach, Xiao Xiaolong's eyes gleamed with excitement. His spatula moved quickly, scooping up a spoonful of broth and pouring it into the goat's stomach. Gurgle, gurgle. The goat's stomach wriggled. As the broth was poured into it, it slowly bulged. Xiao Xiaolong didn't mind it at all. He used a rope to tie the goat's stomach tightly. Then, he held the goat's stomach with both hands, which was clapping like a ball. His divine power surged. Gurgle, gurgle. The broth in the goat's stomach was boiling, constantly hitting the walls of the stomach, making the raw meat inside solidify at a speed visible to the naked eye. What's he doing? So disgusting, can this thing be eaten? Isn't it just a hodgepodge? In the restaurant, Lord Go and the others were dumbfounded, while Hades' Era had a look of disgust on his face. It was a dark cuisine, but why was the death spicy strip so outstanding? Perhaps this was the difference between an apprentice and a chef. Bufang was quite interested. Hades' Era and the others didn't know how to cook, but Bufang did. Xiao Xiaolong's dark cuisine was very creative. Finally, Xiao Xiaolong seemed to have finished cooking. He opened the goat's stomach and poured the divine power liquid drop that Bufang had given him into it. After stirring it, he stuffed the entire goat's stomach into the freezer. After a while, he took out the chilled goat's stomach. Xiao Xiaolong held the kitchen knife and cut down along the wall of the goat's stomach. With a ripping sound, he peeled the goat's stomach apart. Instantly, the crystal-like pudding emerged from the goat's stomach. Dark cuisine. Goat stomach pudding. Done. Xiao Xiaolong rubbed his hands, his eyes shining with excitement. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. The people around him were also dumbfounded. What kind of operation was this? Using the goat stomach to make pudding? Looking at the pieces of goat internal organs floating in the pudding. Just looking at it made people's stomachs churn uncontrollably. When they thought about how the pudding came out of the goat's stomach, they felt their stomachs churn as if it was a terrible torture. Besides Xiao Xiaolong, Yu Fu, Yang Meiji, and Sorceress and Sheng also began to cook dark cuisine. Perhaps it was because the three of them were girls, but the dark cuisine they cooked was so exquisite. Yu Fu's dark cuisine, it was gentle. That's right, gentle. It didn't look scary, and it didn't have Xiao Xiaolong's darkness that made people nauseous. It was a very gentle cuisine. Abyssal chili sauce durian. The essence of the golden durian, which was abundant in the heaven and earth farmland, was simmered for 10 minutes before it was taken out of the pot. Then, it was placed on a delicate plate to make the durian look extraordinary. Because of the slow simmering, the durian's flavor spread freely. Of course, the most soul-enhancing step was to pour the abyssal chili sauce. This abyssal chili sauce, which had been used by Bufang to perfection, had now become the specialty of Yu Fu, the Serpentine Queen. The scarlet abyssal chili sauce, in which there were minced chili dices, was poured over the golden durian. It made people's souls tremble. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched as expected of his apprentice. She really let herself go. Even a good girl like Yu Fu could come up with such a soul-shocking dark cuisine. Durian with chili sauce. She was probably going to ascend to the heavens. Sorceress and Sheng was indeed worthy of her title. Her dark cuisine made Bufang's scalp explode. It was a piece of cheese. That's right, it was a dairy product. However, the triangular piece of cheese was stuffed with small nuts. Bufang didn't know what kind of nuts they were. These are exploding nuts. One of them can blow up an entire city. Sorceress and Sheng blinked her big eyes, her breasts bouncing up and down. She covered her mouth and laughed like a soul singer. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. I told you to let yourself go, but you really want to ascend to the heavens. Bufang turned to look at Yang Meiji's stove. Yang Meiji's tall and sturdy body was slightly crouching. He didn't know what kind of dark cuisine she was cooking. From time to time, Bufang could see Yang Meiji's shoulders shaking. It looked a little scary. Lord Go and Hades' Era couldn't help it anymore. One man and one dog were squatting in the corner, emptying their stomach. Yu and the others also turned pale. Xiao Ai pulled Yu's sleeve. Your Excellency Nethery. No wonder Her Majesty said that chefs are scary. Her Majesty didn't lie to me. Bufang didn't know what to say. These apprentices had really inherited his innate talent. They were really good at cooking dark cuisine. Nyo Han-san was also cooking dark cuisine at the side, but he was obviously more unfamiliar with it than the others. However, the excited expression on his face made Bufang's hair stand on end. This guy was definitely going to cook something amazing, when the apprentices sprinkled Bufang's divine power into the dark cuisine they were cooking, Bufang's eyes widened. Their dishes were finished one after another. Xiao Xiaolong held a crystal pudding ball in his hand, in which all kinds of goat organs were floating. Yu Fu held a bowl of durian with abyssal chili sauce, covering her mouth and giggling. Yang Meiji laughed loudly, holding a plate of steak in her hand, a cooked steak with traces of blood visible to the naked eye. And on top of it was a layer of dead fiery red ants. Soul fire ant steak. Sorceress and Xing laughed with her hands on her hips, her chest rising and falling. Her dark cuisine, popping nut cheese, could be considered a very good dark cuisine. Niu Hansan finally finished his work. He wiped the beads of sweat off his forehead and grinned. He flipped his hand and held a huge white porcelain plate. On top of the plate there were pieces of crab-like ingredients that were fried upside down on top of the plate. It's a very normal dish. Bufang was slightly taken aback. This dish is called fried death spirit spider. It's a rare spider species that I, Niu Hansan, have bred through crossbreeding. It tastes sweet in the mouth and has a faint paralyzing effect. Niu Hansan grinned. Crabs. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He did not believe Niu Hansen's words. Bufang waved his hand and wrapped the dark cuisine with a liquid drop of divine power. Bufang finally understood how terrifying the chefs were after they let themselves go. For the first time, he felt sorry for those soul demons. These various dark cuisines are going to wipe out the soul demon bloodline. Bufang seemed to have sensed the despair of the soul demon army in advance. Chapter 1774. Very good. The only criterion to test the dark cuisine is its lethality to soul demons. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly as he looked at the apprentices, who were glowing. Oh, lethality to soul demons? The apprentices froze for a moment. Then, they focused their eyes and turned to look at the monsters hovering in the distance. Perhaps those were the soul demons Bufang mentioned. Now show me your dark cuisine, said Bufang. The apprentices looked at each other. The next moment they became excited. Xiao Xiaolong ran into the distance with his crystal pudding in one hand. Then, he took a step forward and soared into the sky. Xiao Xiaolong held the crystal lamb stomach pudding in one hand and dashed into the distance. He took a step forward and his figure suddenly soared into the sky. Rumble! Holding the crystal pudding with one hand, Xiao Xiaolong ran into the distance, took a step forward and soared into the sky. Boom! With one slash, everything seemed to become extremely slow. The pudding began to tremble violently, and then it was cut into countless pieces by the knife. The knife covered the pudding. The next moment, thousands of pieces of pudding whistled through the air and rushed toward the thousands of soul demons hovering in the distance. The next moment, thousands of puddings flew whistling through the air toward the tens of thousands of soul demons hovering in the sky. The next moment, thousands of pieces of pudding flew whistling through the air toward the thousands of soul demons hovering in the sky. Xiao Xiaolong turned into a stream of light and sped toward them. Xiao Xiaolong grinned with an excited look on his face. Of course, he was also a little doubtful because he was not sure if his pudding had any effect on the soul demons. After all, the strength of the soul demons present was not weak, and none of them was weaker than him. He might have some confidence in fighting 2 of them at once, but to fight thousands of them at once, forget it. However, since Bufang said that the dark cuisine had a restraining effect on these soul demons, he would give it a try. As the pudding sped through the air, the internal organs of the sheep seemed to twist and shake. A piece of pudding approached a soul demon, whose eyes widened in an instant. He wanted to refuse, but he struggled and waved his hand. He knew how terrifying these foods were. Many of his companions had died of spontaneous combustion after eating them because they could not refuse them. This soul demon did not want to die. He still had a bright future ahead of him. However, the bouncing pudding seemed to exude a fatal temptation, making him unable to shift his gaze away. His eyes kept moving along the pudding, as if a demon was about to crawl out of his heart. You can't eat it. You absolutely cannot eat it. The soul demon's eyes were bloodshot. All food was evil. But the fragrance of the pudding made him unable to extricate himself. The cold air on the pudding seemed to freeze his soul. Awo! The soul demon's eyes widened because he found that he had already bitten the pudding. The moment it entered his mouth, it enveloped his taste buds. The pudding melted and flowed into his mind. Her heart felt like it was going to melt. Delicious! It's delicious! The soul demon wept. Boom! In the next moment, tens of thousands of flames erupted from his body and engulfed him in an instant. Some soul demons resisted the temptation and refused the pudding. Perhaps some soul demons simply repulsed her, so they resisted the temptation. This made Xiao Xiaolong feel a little regretful. Perhaps this was the gap between him and Bufang. No soul demon could refuse Bufang's dark cuisine. Yu Fu's snake tail twisted and she soared into the sky. She gently tossed out the chili durian. One serving, another serving, and another serving, the sky was filled with chili durians. The stench and the spiciness were mixed together, pungent and heavy. Although this dish did not look disgusting or horrible, its content was the most terrible among all the dark cuisines. Chili durian? Why don't you go to heaven? At the very least, many people in front of the restaurant covered their mouths with their hand. Damn it, this is a war with a taste. Compared to Xiao Xiaolong's lamb stomach pudding, Yu Fu's dark cuisine seemed to be more lethal. The main reason was that it was much more tempting to soul demons than the stomach-nourishing pudding. Xiao Xiaolong was dumbfounded. Damn it! This doesn't make sense. Why do these soul demons prefer such a disgusting thing? Xiao Xiaolong looked indignant. He hurriedly tossed out the pudding. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. Xiao Xiaolong still had not fully understood the true meaning of dark cuisine. The more terrifying the dark cuisine was, the harder it was for soul demons to resist it. There was no doubt that Yu Fu had the absolute advantage in the first confrontation. Slurp, slurp, a soul demon's face was covered with chili oil and durians, but his expression was one of uncontrollable enjoyment. Am I king poisoned? The soul demon refused in his mind as he ate. However, as the chili durian entered his stomach, he felt as if his stomach had been sublimated. The fragrance and the spiciness complemented each other. This is a supreme delicacy. After taking the last bite, the soul demon could no longer control himself, and crimson flames burst out of his body. Soul demons were everywhere. Unable to control themselves, they were engulfed and killed by the dark cuisine. Of course, they were happy before they died. They gradually disappeared in the midst of the delicious food. In fact, the most lethal dish was Sorceress and Sheng's explosive cheese. She was stuffing explosive nuts into her cheese. As soon as the soul demons bit into them, the exploding nuts exploded in an instant, blowing their bodies to pieces. This feeling was unprecedented. The soul demons were a little confused. Before they could understand what was happening, they were already dead. The explosions in the sky continued to ring out. Everyone could not help but suck in a cold breath. These chefs were really the nemesis of soul demons. There was no doubt that the winner of this tasty battle was these chefs. It was Bufang and his apprentice chefs. Niu Hansen felt a little regretful. His fry-dead spirit spider did not seem to be able to crush the soul demons. He could not believe that those soul demons could restrain their desires. Compared with Xiao Xiaolong and the others, his dark cuisine was the worst. In fact, it was even weaker than Xiao Xiaolong's pudding. Niu Hansen was inexplicably disappointed. I can't afford to offend them. I'd better go back to the heaven and earth farmland and continue experimenting with hybridization. It's still the chefs who cook. Boom, boom, boom. In the sky, the soul demons kept exploding like gorgeous fireworks. The group of people in front of the restaurant was dumbfounded as they watched. Hoodoo opened her mouth, somewhat surprised. A few chefs had crushed and repelled the invincible army of soul demons that dominated the universe? That was a little too fearsome. Were all chefs so unreasonable? In midair, Envy Great Soul Overlord's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he watched. The army of soul demons is so weak? These damned chefs. Duchess Yunlan, on the other hand, was very excited. The top soul overlords who had besieged her were now flustered because of the dark cuisine. So she felt much more relaxed at the moment. On the other hand, she was able to fight Envy Great Soul Overlord evenly. In the restaurant, Hoodoo breathed a sigh of relief. She did not expect that Bufang had really found a bunch of reliable chefs. Xiao Ai, who was standing next to you, also could not help but open her mouth wide. Bufang put his hands behind his back and glanced indifferently at Xiao Ai. As you wish, reinforcements are here. Are you convinced by these reinforcements? Xiao Ai's body shook, and she quickly nodded like a chick pecking at rice. Yes. Owner Bu, you're amazing. Do you still need apprentices? Xiao Ai's eyes were shining like stars. Forget it. You're not talented enough. Bufang shook his head. Don't. Xiao Ai, can sing Twinkle, 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 Little Star. Xiao Ai said, puffing out her chest. You was so amused that she could not help but cover her mouth and laugh. Hades' Era and Lord Go could not help but smile as well. This subordinate of Netheries is really silly and adorable. She only saw the moment when Bufang's apprentices showed their strength, but she did not see when they were tortured by Bufang. She's still too young. Bufang ignored Xiao Ai. This was because the situation in the sky had changed drastically. The army of soul demons was beginning to collapse. Bufang's ability to cook dark cuisine alone might be limited, but with the help of his apprentices, his speed and number were much higher. The so-called army of soul demons was really not a problem for them. Under the bombardment and suppression of the dark cuisine, the army began to flee in disarray. Under the bombardment and suppression of the dark cuisine, the army began to flee in panic. They were defeated in an instant, and one by one, they fled as fast as they could into the distance. They had no choice but to flee. Otherwise, they would die. Do you see your other brothers and sisters? They have all been killed because they could not resist the temptation. Envy Great Soul Overlord roared. However, he could not control the defeated army. The army fled like crazy, flying into the distance at full speed. They were defeated, and each of them was utterly defeated. They came valiantly and energetically, but now they were fleeing like stray dogs. The dark cuisine hovering in midair scared them out of their wit. It was 2F** King Scary. Marquis Langu, Master Jinyong, Viscount Ash, and the other experts who were now in Yu's camp landed one after another. Their faces were full of strange expressions. They looked at the four figures in the sky. They were Bufang's apprentices, who were only God Emperor. But they had so many saints of the Great Path and chaotic saints, but they were no match for four chefs. Envy Great Soul Overlord sent Duchess Yunlan flying with one blow. He roared and tried to flee. At this moment, Lord Go and Hades' Era teleported over and blocked his way. It's over. Envy Great Soul Overlord was shocked. When he was stopped by Lord Go and Hades' Era, he had a bad feeling. A duke and two heaven gods, even he would have a headache dealing with such a lineup. Run. Envy Great Soul Overlord thought without hesitation. Then, he turned into a plume of black smoke and rushed toward Soul's army. It was not easy to kill a Great Soul Overlord. If he wanted to leave, it would be difficult for him to stay. Especially when the other party had already steeled his heart to escape. Lord Go's paw fell and slapped Envy Great Soul Overlord. Hades' Era whipped him with a golden spicy strip, causing Envy Great Soul Overlord to scream and tremble. Duchess Yunlan also made a move. Half of Envy Great Soul Overlord's body exploded. However, this kind of injury did not make him stop. He was still determined to run forward. The soul demons around him were either killed or wounded. When some of the stronger soul overlords saw that the situation was not good, they fled and joined the army. There was no doubt that the restaurant had won the battle. The reason for the victory was just a few chefs. Xiao Xiaolong clenched his fists excitedly. These are the soul demons? They are too weak. Yu Fu and the others nodded in agreement. Now that their cultivation levels were higher, they understood the fighting prowess of a higher level. Above the God Emperor were the saints of the Great Path and chaotic saints. It was very difficult for them to reach this level, and they might need a lot of accumulation. After all, their cultivation bases could improve so fast because of Bu Fang's breakthrough, which had caused the will of the heaven and earth farmland to change, causing their cultivation bases to skyrocket. However, the saints of the Great Path and chaotic saints were not that powerful. They could be solved with a dark cuisine. In the future, if you meet a saint of the Great Path other than a soul demon, run as far as you can. Bu Fang glanced at the apprentices, who seemed to be overconfident, and could not help but twitch his mouth. Duchess Yunlan and the others also landed. She looked at Bu Fang in surprise. Bu Fang and 4 apprentices. With such a lineup, they probably had the guts to invade the soul demon universe. Duchess Yunlan looked at Yu and Hudu and was about to say something. Suddenly, her expression changed dramatically. She turned her head and looked in the direction of the cursed goddess palace. There, the towering statue of the cursed goddess exploded and fell to the ground. Terrible smoke and dust billowed, destroying heaven and earth. What really surprised Duchess Yunlan was not this. Instead, all of a sudden, an extremely powerful aura erupted from the cursed goddess palace. It was as if a supreme aura was spreading from the depths of the universe, and the whole Void City had come to life at this moment. The Queen of Curses has shown up? Chapter 1775. Rumble. The Queen of Curses' guardian, the silver-haired woman, was pierced by countless scorpion tails. Blood trickled down her body and almost dried up. Her eyes were dull, and she leaned against the broken statue of the Queen of Curses. Her breathing was very weak. In the distance, Duchess Nightmare hissed. Her body was also covered with wounds. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord and the other top soul overlords had put a lot of pressure on her. Coupled with the pressure from the army of soul demons, she felt as if she was carrying a great mountain on her back. The discomfort and pain were simply irresistible. In the dilapidated square, Greed Great Soul Overlord walked toward her step by step. His long scorpion tail lifted the silver-haired woman's body. Her body was extremely broken, and her curse power had dimmed, while the power of sin was spreading. Cursed Goddess Soul stood in the distance with her eyes drooped. She did not say anything, for she did not know what to say. Perhaps she felt a little guilty, but the guilt was soon washed away. If one wanted to sit on the throne of Void City, someone had to be sacrificed. The silver-haired woman's breathing was weak, but she stared coldly at Soul. The look in her eyes made her hair stand on end. What are you looking at? It's time for someone else to take over Void City. Greed Great Soul Overlord sneered. He raised a hand, grabbed the silver-haired woman's head, and squeezed it with his huge palm as if to crush her head. In the distance, after killing a few top soul overlords, Duchess Nightmare was seriously injured by Gluttony Great Soul Overlord. Coughing blood, she flew backward and smashed to the ground. You have no chance to turn the tables. The other 2 cursed goddesses are cowering and afraid to come out. Who else can the Queen of Curses choose but Soul to inherit the throne? Greed Great Soul Overlord grinned, revealing his sharp teeth. He glanced at the broken statue, then at the palace with its tightly shut doors. His eyes gleamed fiercely. No one can save you now. Greed Great Soul Overlord roared with laughter. He began to exert more force in his palm. The silver-haired woman's head began to deform, but her eyes were still fixed on Soul. Duchess Nightmare's eyes were full of reluctance. Rumble, suddenly, there was a commotion in the palace with its tightly shut doors. Then, the door seemed to open. With a creak, a crack appeared on the door. An extremely majestic aura surged out from the crack. It was like floating dry ice. That was the power of the curse, an extremely dense curse power, as if it was the source of the river of curse. There were also drops of liquid floating in the gas. Then, it was as if celestial music was playing in unison. The sound of gongs and drums filled the air. Everyone was stunned. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's pupils constricted. Greed Great Soul Overlord's heart tightened. The silver-haired woman, who was barely breathing, raised her head slightly. There was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Duchess Nightmare was overjoyed. She knew that the Queen of Curses would never give up Void City. The soul demons in the sky did not dare to move. The aura emanating from the existence behind the door was like the will of the universe descending upon their bodies, binding them and making them unable to move. That feeling was extremely terrifying. It was as if that existence could erase them into nothingness with just a thought. The Queen of Curses. There was no doubt that the existence behind the door was the Queen of Curses. She stood at the peak of the universe and was on the same level as the Soul God. Gulp. Many soul demons fell to the ground and did not dare to move. Cursed Goddess Soul opened her mouth wide and stared blankly at the palace. She felt as if her neck was being strangled, and it was difficult for her to breathe. She never thought that the Queen of Curses would appear. Rumble Greed Great Soul Overlord loosened his grip. The silver-haired woman fell to the ground. She coughed up blood, but she burst out laughing. It was a mocking laugh. Duchess Nightmare staggered to her feet and glanced coldly at the soul demons. Now that the Queen has appeared, all these soul demons must die. Tap, 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 the sound of faint footsteps rang out. Then, behind the palace, an indifferent voice rang out. All of you get out of here, or die. The voice was cold and emotionless, but it sent chills from the soles of their feet to their heads. All the soul demons felt as if their hearts were about to explode. Hearing that, they retreated frantically, turned, and were about to flee. Greed Great Soul Overlord knew very well how terrifying the Queen of Curses was. After all, she was a supreme existence on the same level as the Soul God. Without hesitation, he threw the silver-haired woman aside, turned, and fled. Taking advantage of the fact that the Queen of Curses had not started a massacre, he fled frantically from Void City. Who said the Queen of Curses was seriously injured and fell into a deep sleep? Who said the Queen of Curses was on the verge of death and was looking for an heir? Everything is King nonsense. The soul demons retreated into the distance like a receding tide. The silver-haired woman's laughter echoed wantonly in the void. Looking at the retreating soul demons, Duchess Nightmare felt very pleased. At this moment, Soul was a little confused, a little flustered, and a little desperate. She did not seem to expect the Queen of Curses to appear. Let's go. Greed Great Soul Overlord appeared at Soul's side and said, if the Queen of Curses attacked, they would definitely die. There was no way they could run. The Queen of Curses was no longer on the same level as a chaotic saint. Soul was pulled by Greed Great Soul and retreated with the tide of soul demons. Wait! Suddenly, a loud bellow shook heaven and earth. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord narrowed his eyes and said coldly. As soon as his voice rang out, all the soul demons paused. Gluttony, are you crazy? Are you going to stay here and wait for death? Greed Great Soul Overlord hissed. He had thought that the Queen of Curses was still asleep, which was why he dared to act so presumptuously. But now the Queen's awakening scared him out of his wits. Don't you think it strange? If the Queen really wanted to kill us, we would have died long ago. Why would she let us escape? We've almost destroyed Void City, Bufang said. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord hovered in midair and said, He felt that something was strange about this. The Queen of Curses did not come out of the palace. There must be something strange about all this. Could it be that there was something wrong with the Queen? That was possible. If that was the case, they might have a chance to conquer Void City. This was too bold. This was too crazy. This was a gamble with their lives. Greed Great Soul Overlord's pupils constricted. Looking at Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, his barbed scorpion tail curled up. However, on second thought, he seemed to agree with Gluttony Great Soul Overlord. With the Queen of Curses' ferocious reputation, they should not have a chance to walk out of Void City alive. Could it be, was it really as Gluttony Great Soul Overlord said? Duchess Nightmare and the silver-haired woman paused, and then their expressions changed dramatically. They also thought of the same question. The reason why Void City had become a place of exile for many universes and no one dared to cause trouble in it was because of the Queen of Curses' decisiveness in killing. However, this time, the Queen of Curses actually told these soul demons to get out of here. There was something strange about this. In the distance, a whistling sound rang out. Bufang and the others were flying over. Yu Hutu and the others had also arrived. The void was crowded with soul demons, and the door of the Queen of Curses' palace was ajar. Where was the Queen of Curses? Bufang looked around curiously. Yu and Hutu also appeared. In midair, Soul's pupils constricted slightly. I'll say it again. Get out of here or die. A cold voice rang out from the Queen of Curses' palace again. In midair, Envy Great Soul Overlord also flew over. The three Great Soul Overlords gathered in midair. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord glanced at Bufang and the others, then at the Queen of Curses' palace. His eyes grew cold. There's no turning back now. I'd like to see if the Queen of Curses has really awakened. A mighty power of sin suddenly exploded out of Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, and the shadow of a fierce beast that looked like a Tautai emerged behind him. Then, he streaked across the sky and approached the towering palace in a flash. Everyone turned pale with fright. Greed Great Soul Overlord's pupils constricted. However, he did not move. Envy Great Soul Overlord was dumbfounded. The surrounding soul demons also held their breath. As Gluttony Great Soul Overlord approached, the figure in the Queen of Curses' palace seemed to fly into a rage. A creak rang out. The stone door opened again. In the next moment, a fair and slender arm stretched out from the stone door. Then, the arm clenched. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, who was flying in midair, was squeezed violently and twisted in a strange way. Bam! Then, Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's body flew backward, and the shadow behind him shattered. Dripping with blood, he crashed to the ground. The soul demons were silent. A look of fear emerged in the eyes of the soul demons. Bufang sucked in a cold breath. The Xiao Xiaolong brothers behind Bufang had never seen such a scene before, and they were trembling. Yu, Hutu, and the others' eyes lit up. Ha ha! Sure enough, there's something wrong with you. I'm not dead. Boom! The ground exploded. Bathed in blood, Gluttony Great Soul Overlord rose to his feet and roared at the palace. He walked step by step, leaving bloody footprints on the ground. The Queen of Curses! Come out! Gluttony Great Soul Overlord roared. The mighty power of sin exploded out of him and turned into a tornado. A huge Tautai that seemed to be about to devour the starry sky appeared in the starry sky. Then, he roared at the palace. Rumble! How dare you! The door of the palace opened wide. A graceful figure, who seemed to have gathered the light of the whole universe, slowly stepped out. Her long, straight, and perfect legs attracted the attention of countless people. The moment this figure appeared, heaven and earth turned dark and gloomy. It was the Queen of Curses. Rumble! The figure flipped her hand and lightly struck out with her palm. The huge Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, who was about to devour the starry sky, was shattered by the palm. Bam! Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's body exploded and turned into flesh and blood that filled the sky. With just one move, a great soul overlord, who was a peak chaotic saint, was killed. A terrible aura pervaded the whole void city. The Queen of Curses. This is the mighty Queen of Curses. Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord were already trembling. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord is courting death. The Queen of Curses is seriously injured? Does she look like she's seriously injured? This fellow has killed all the soul demons. Suddenly, in midair, the pitch-black power of sin gathered and transformed into the weakened Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's true form. Bufang and the others sucked in their breath. Bufang was horrified as well. She had killed a great soul overlord with one palm. Was this the Queen of Curses' strength? Her strength was at the same level as the soul god and the god of cooking. At this moment, Bufang had an inexplicable yearning for it. Lord Go and Hades' era also clicked their tongues. They reckoned that the palm that slapped the chaos space was no stronger than this. Bufang looked at the graceful figure standing in front of the Queen of Curses' palace. She seemed to stand at the top of the universe. Oh! Suddenly Bufang paused. Not only Bufang, but everyone else felt a little puzzled and strange. In the sky, Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, who had manifested his true form as a soul demon, burst out laughing. The Queen of Curses is nothing more than this. Duchess Nightmare, Duchess Yunlan, and the others turned pale. Because, standing in front of the palace was the Queen of Curses. Her body was shrinking at a rate visible to the naked eye. Finally, she let out a childish Lolita voice. "You're courting death." Chapter 1776. Her childish voice, everyone was dumbfounded. Where was the Queen of Curses? How did she turn into a little girl? Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, who had transformed into his true form, was laughing excitedly. He had made the right bet. Something had happened to the Queen of Curses. If the graceful figure from before had the power to destroy heaven and earth, then this lowly before him was simply a clown acting cute. Her aura was extremely weak, not even 1/10,000th of the Queen of Curses. Duchess Nightmare and the others were struck dumb. They did not seem to have expected this. The army of soul demons, who were about to flee, froze for a moment. The next moment, they let out deafening roars that shook the void. Their voices were filled with anger at being deceived. Duchess Nightmare's face was pale, and the silver-haired woman despaired. The Queen of Curses had turned into a little girl? Where was the mighty Queen of Curses who had suppressed many universes in those years? Was Void City really going to fall into the hands of the soul demons? Bufang's expression was very strange. He was no stranger to that little girl. Wasn't she the one who ate spicy strips in his restaurant? He was curious where she had gone, but now it seemed that she had come here to pretend to be the Queen of Curses. Wait a minute. Could this little girl be the Queen of Curses? Bufang's expression grew stranger. The Queen of Curses, who was said to be on the same level as the Soul God and the God of Cooking, was actually a little girl wearing diapers? The Queen of Curses' robe shrank, and her figure, which had stepped out from behind the door, gradually became shorter. She seemed to notice her change, so she raised a hand and slapped her head. Then, she turned and went back into the palace. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's laughter echoed through the starry sky. Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord sneered. Thousands of soul demons descended once again, causing heaven and earth to shake. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord raised his hand. Although he was only left with his true form, the Great Soul Overlord was a soul demon. A powerful suction erupted and sucked countless soul demons into his palm. His fleshly body, which had been shattered by the Queen's blow, began to slowly recover. Twisting his neck, Gluttony Great Soul Overlord opened his mouth. At this moment, he looked like an ugly fish with a huge mouth full of ferocious and sharp teeth. However, his aura was extremely powerful. Soul, do it. Something has happened to the Queen of Curses. Her strength has been greatly reduced. Now is the best time for us to take control of Void City. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord said, his huge eyes rolling. Soul's pale face gradually calmed down. That's right, she no longer had a chance, so she could only seize the opportunity now. Soul's expression was extremely grave. Do it. She gritted her teeth and said. Boom. His words fell. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord, Greed Great Soul Overlord, and Envy Great Soul Overlord struck at the same time. They soared into the sky and flew past. In an instant, he charged towards Duchess Nightmare, who was still in shock. Sensing danger, Duke Nightmare's hair stood on end. She turned around and blasted out a move that seemed to tear the heavens and earth apart. However, the aura of the three great soul overlords joined together, and the power of three sinful forces seemed to form a strange array. Then, it turned into a huge, evil paw. The paw slapped down. A rumbling sound rang out. Duchess Nightmare was seriously injured. She was knocked flying backward and smashed hard into the palace. Her face was ashen, and she still could not believe what had happened. What happened to the Queen of Curses? In the distance, the expressions of Bufang and the others changed dramatically. Duchess Yunlan moved in a flash and let out a long howl, causing the stars to tremble. With one move, she went straight toward the three great soul overlords. Lord Go barked. His paw reached out and tore through the void. With the death spicy strip dangling between his lips, Hades' Era took a step forward, pulled out the golden spicy strip, and went straight toward the three great soul overlords. The three Duke-level experts struck out in an instant. The evil paw swept toward them. Lord Dog and the others' attacks landed on the evil claw, but they were actually unable to shake it. They could only cause it to flicker unsteadily. This is, Duchess Yunlan's plump body trembled. In the distance, Yu and Hudu focused their eyes as well. Hudu sucked in a breath. This is the heavenly demon array. It's constructed with the sinful power of a great soul overlord, and its power is definitely not as simple as 1 + 1. The evil paw slammed into Lord Go, Hades' Era, and Duchess Yunlan, making them unable to move forward. In front of the palace, Soul's eyes gleamed with excitement. Step by step, she walked toward the distance. The palaces were right in front of her. She could almost see the peerless throne behind the palaces. That was the throne of Void City. As long as she sat there, she would become the master of Void City. Stop right there. Duchess Nightmare staggered to her feet and yelled, You're right. Soul's face grew serious. She turned to look at Duchess Nightmare. Struck by the evil paw, Duchess Nightmare was seriously injured, and her aura was weak. However, she still had some confidence in dealing with Soul. You're not qualified to sit on that throne, Duchess Nightmare said, taking a deep breath. Why? Soul asked calmly. She was neither angry nor annoyed. She walked step by step, getting closer and closer to Duchess Nightmare. Do you think those two out there are more qualified than me? Soul said. Blood trickled down the corner of Duchess Nightmare's mouth. Her nightmare divine body was on the verge of disintegration. However, she gritted her teeth and stared coldly at Soul. Look at what this woman has done to Void City. I can't believe she lured an army of soul demons into the city. Is she not going to give up until she destroys Void City? You're not qualified, Duchess Nightmare said coldly. If I'm not qualified, then those two out there are even less qualified. I've fought for everything I have today with my life. What were they doing when I was fighting for my life in the Soul Demon universe? Soul said. Her tone had become much more urgent. They can't compare to what I've experienced. My qualifications are not up to you to judge. Soul's eyes suddenly turned scarlet. The next moment, a black orb condensed with the power of sin appeared in her hand. Inside the orb, suddenly, a withered claw stretched out like a piece of dead wood. Duchess Nightmare's pupils constricted. She found that her body was pressed hard to the ground by the withered claw. She wanted to break the claw with her supreme curse power, but she found that she could not break it. What's going on? Duchess Nightmare sucked in a cold breath. Bam! Soul's palm pressed against her head, then she slammed it hard on the ground, shattering it and cracking it. Lie down. The throne of Void City is mine, Soul said. At this moment, her eyes were scarlet, and her aura was extremely terrifying. It was as if the soul in this body was not the soul that Duchess Nightmare was familiar with, but an extremely terrifying soul. As Soul spoke, it was as if a soul was about to come out of her body. Even her voice had become vague and hoarse. Soul rose to her feet and walked unsteadily toward the Queen of Curses' palace. Her scarlet eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of her mouth curved upward into an excited smile. In the sky, the great battle continued. Terrible attacks and rumbling filled the air. The three great soul overlords had joined forces with the heavenly demon array to suppress the Lord Go and the others. For a moment they were in a stalemate. The army of soul demons was also frantically invading. They were forced back by Bufang, Xiao Xiaolong, and the others with dark cuisine. However, this was not a perfect solution. The divine sense of Xiao Xiaolong and the others was also rapidly depleting. The Fox of Annihilation kept spewing soul meatballs, killing one soul demon after another. However, the soul demons kept coming, and even after they died, they could still reform their bodies. They were very difficult to deal with. Xiao Bai also joined the battle. Purple-eyed Xiao Bai was extremely ferocious. Purple light beams shot out and swept across a large area. With just a few people, they had resisted the army of tens of thousands of soul demons. Bufang frowned. He turned to look at the Queen of Curses' palace, which was shrouded in darkness. This was not the way. Hold on for a while. I'll go and have a look, Bufang said to Xiao Xiaolong and the others. With the support of the oyster pancakes provided by Bufang, they could continue to use their divine senses. He nodded solemnly. Especially with Niu Hansen's help. At some point, Niu Hansen had concocted a seed. It should be made from the corpse of Pride Great Soul Overlord that Bufang had left in the Heaven and Earth farmland. When the seeds fell on a soul demon's body, they would gradually erode the soul demon. It was a sharp weapon against soul demons. If it were not for Niu Hansen, Xiao Xiaolong and the others would have been defeated. After all, there were just too many soul demons. Xiao Bai was killing in the distance. A mountain of soul demon corpses had piled up under his feet. He looked like a god of slaughter. Bufang spun, and the law of space swirled around him. Bufang went straight through the darkness. Yu and Huda followed him. As cursed goddesses, they also wanted to know what had happened to the Queen of Curses. They also had a chance to compete for the throne of Void City. The three of them came through the darkness. They landed on the dilapidated ground in front of the Queen of Curses' palace. Oh! The withered branches looked as if they were growing out of the ground. They bound Duchess Nightmare's body. She lay on the ground, her eyes dull. Her life force seemed to be absorbed by the withered branches. Bufang, Yu, and Huda came over. They all sucked in a cold breath. What is this? Bufang frowned. Yu shook her head. She did not understand. Hutu, on the other hand, was lost in thought. She seemed to have seen something like this before. Then, she seemed to think of something, and her face filled with horror. This is the Soul Demon Universe's soul-devouring tree, cultivated with the essence of soul demons. Huda sucked in a cold breath. There were many almighty experts in the primitive universe, but they still struggled to fight against soul demons. It was not only because of the uniqueness of soul demons, but also because of these soul-devouring trees. When soul overlords mastered weapons made of soul-devouring trees, their fighting prowess would increase countless times. Legend had it that soul-devouring trees were controlled by the soul god. Bufang did not expect to see this thing in Void City. Frowning, Bufang raised his hand and touched the soul-devouring tree. The soul-devouring tree immediately wriggled, and fine branches extended from it, trying to bind Bufang. Bufang tore the branches apart. The divine flame surged. Bufang was going to burn the soul-devouring tree. However, as soon as the divine flame touched it, Duchess Nightmare, standing under the tree, widened her eyes and let out a miserable howl. Don't. Her soul is now one with the soul-devouring tree. If you burn the tree, it will be the same as burning her soul. Huda quickly stopped Bufang. Bufang stopped immediately. This was a little tricky. Don't worry about me. Go to the Queen's palace and stop Soul. The throne of Void City must not fall into her hands. Her will is controlled by the Soul God. Duchess Nightmare said painfully and anxiously. Bufang and the others also felt a slight headache. For the time being, they had no choice but to get up, give up on saving Duchess Nightmare, and head toward the Queen's palace. The heavy stone door was ajar. When Bufang and the others arrived, they saw Soul's body sway and enter in a flash. Hutu and Nethery exchanged a glance and hurried over to them. With a sway of their bodies, they also dived into the hole. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. Bufang did not know whether he should go to the Queen's palace or not. After all, according to the Queen's character, she hated chefs very much. He was afraid that if he went in, he would be killed by the Empress trick. If that happened, he would want to cry but have no tears. However, after thinking about it in the end, Bufang still stepped into the door. Not to mention that you had already gone in. Bufang had an intuition that the Queen of Curses should have something to do with the god of cooking. This alone made it worth Bufang's time to step into the door. His body swayed. Bufang opened the stone door. He took a deep breath and stepped into it. The moment he stepped in, a silhouette dashed toward him at high speed. Chapter 1777. As soon as he stepped into the Queen of Curses' palace, a figure flew towards him at high speed. Bufang frowned. He raised his hand and pressed it against the figure's head. The figure in front of him maintained a charging posture. She stretched out her arms as if she was moving forward. "Stinky chef, give this queen your dish." A childish voice rang out. Bufang could not help but raise his eyebrows. What was this? Was it a little girl? Bufang stood there calmly, pressing against the little girl's head. No matter how the latter moved her arms, she could not reach Bufang. She immediately took a step back in anger. "How can you still be so calm here?" Bufang looked at the little girl with a strange expression. It was really hard to imagine that the little girl in front of him was actually the Queen of Curses, the domineering Queen of Curses who suppressed the universe and made the surrounding universes tremble, was actually so cute? It's a long story. You chefs are all bad things. The little girl hugged her arms, pouted, and rolled her eyes. "Then don't eat my dish," Bufang said. The little girl hurriedly glared at him. "That won't do. I only hate chefs, but I don't hate food," the little loli said with a serious expression, and Bufang almost believed her. Bufang thought to himself, my dish might have some beneficial effect on the little loli. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so eager to eat it. However, Bufang was not sure what kind of beneficial effect it had. "What dish do you want?" Bufang looked at the little girl who was puffing up. When the little girl heard this, her eyes lit up. "It's that long, spicy, and numb one," the little girl said. "Death spicy strip?" Bufang was stunned. The little girl had eaten the death spicy strip in his restaurant before. It was a dark cuisine. It was so small, but the taste was so strong. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Boom. Suddenly, in the palace there was a violent tremor. Bufang's face suddenly changed. "You and Huda have entered the palace, but I haven't found them yet." At this time, Bufang finally had the mood to look around. This palace was extraordinary. All around them was a boundless starry sky. Faint white smoke was rising in spirals. At the highest point there was a flight of stairs made from meteorites, and the flight of stairs was over 100 steps. At the top of the 100-step starry sky stairway there was a chair. It was illusory, mystical, and incomparably noble. That was the throne of Void City. Bufang looked at the throne. Although it felt very close, he knew that it was an illusion. Stop looking. You're not a cursed goddess, so you'll never be able to get close to the stairway of star and the throne of nothingness. The little girl crossed her arms in front of her chest like an adult, glanced at Bufang and said, "That throne symbolizes authority. Sitting on it, one can overlook the universe." Bufang gave her a sideways glance. "I don't care. Where are you, Hutu, and the others? And Sol, the cursed goddess who came in earlier?" Bufang asked. The little girl's face was cold and arrogant. She did not answer Bufang. "Do you still want the death spicy strip?" Bufang said, narrowing his eyes and twitching the corner of his mouth. It was as if he was a bad uncle trying to coax a little girl with a lollipop. The little girl was furious. She had to bow her head when she was under someone else's roof. "They have entered the grand cursed array and are heading for the stairway of star," she said. "So, you can't control them to go to the throne now?" Bufang paused. The little girl rolled her eyes, lifted her floral dress, and twirled in front of Bufang like a little fairy. His tone was lifeless as he said, "Do you think my current state is awesome? Why do you think the soul demons dared to invade Void City with their army? Soul God, that old geezer, can see through everything." The little lowly exhaled and said. Bufang's brows furrowed. He turned to look at the stairway of star in the distance. There seemed to be three blurry silhouettes constantly moving forward in the curling layers of clouds. Finally, the first figure stepped onto the stairway. It was cursed goddess Sol. Bufang's pupils constricted. Before long, another figure walked out of the clouds. It was Hutu. The two of them climbed up one after the other. Their pace was neither fast nor slow. Cursed goddess Sol glanced over her shoulder at Hutu, who was following closely behind her. Her eyes gleamed fiercely. The throne of Void City could only belong to her. After a long time, Inetheri's figure walked out of the layers of clouds. Compared to cursed goddess Sol and Hutu, Yu's strength is a little weaker. Bufang withdrew his gaze and looked at the little girl. "Tell me, what's going on with you? Are you really the Queen of Curses?" Bufang asked, frowning as he looked indifferently at the little girl. The palace seemed to be isolated from the world. It was extremely quiet, and no one could hear the fighting and noise outside. For a moment, the atmosphere was a little awkward. The little girl did not seem to want to talk about it. However, Bufang was not in a hurry. Calmly, he took out a death spicy strip, held it in the corner of his mouth, and bit into it. He raised his eyebrows slightly. Bufang sucked in a cold breath. "It's really spicy." The little girl did not move. As she listened to Bufang munching on the spicy strip, she finally could not stand it anymore. She glared at Bufang. "Give me the death spicy strip," she said. Bufang could not help but ask, "What's your relationship with Era? Why do you like spicy strips so much?" "Relationship? Of course not. You don't understand." The little girl was still very angry. "Sure enough, no chef is good." Bufang did not speak again. He just kept munching on the spicy strip. The little girl pursed her lips. She turned her head and looked at Bufang. After a long time, she sighed. "I'm the Queen of Curses. Or rather, I'm not. The Queen of Curses is still asleep, and I can be considered a condensation of her spirit, a wisp of her will," the little girl said. Bufang paused. He even forgot to swallow the spicy strip in his mouth. "Is there such a thing? The Queen of Curses is still asleep? Where is she?" Bufang asked. The little girl raised a hand and pointed at the stairway of star in the distance. "In the stairway of star, under the throne, the Queen's immortal body is buried there. I was also born there. I belong to the Queen's will, and I know some of her memories, which belong to the will of Void City," the little girl said seriously. Bufang could see that she was not lying. The queen's memory clearly shows that chefs are not good people. The little lowly added another sentence. Bufang twitched his mouth. Did the Queen of Curses have some grudge with chefs? Someone who could have a grudge with the queen should be the god of cooking. For some reason, Bufang's heart was filled with the fire of gossip. However, the little girl did not know much. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. What about them? Bufang was referring to you and the other two, who were climbing the stairway of star in the distance. Whoever seizes the throne will gain control of Void City, said the little girl. She was a body of will, but the Queen of Curses was actually still asleep, or rather, dead. So there was nothing she could do. Even though she knew that letting Soul sit on the throne would be a disaster for Void City, she could not stop it. If she had a way, she would have done it long ago. Unfortunately, she only had the Queen's will, but she had no power. This was also the reason why she had been avoiding Soul. At most, she could use her control of Void City to project a shadow, such as to fool Countess Xiaoqiu. If she really had to do it, she would not have been able to do anything. As for why she was so eager to eat the death spicy strip, because the little girl found something. She had eaten the death spicy strip. Before that, she had temporarily entered the state of the Queen of Curses and smashed Gluttony Great Soul Overlord with one move. Although that power was only for a moment, it was a pleasant surprise for the little girl. That was why she was so eager to eat the death spicy strip. It was not just because it was delicious. Bufang frowned, holding the death spicy strip between his lips. In the distance, the competition on the Stairway of Star had reached a white-hot stage. Of course, it was mainly the competition between Soul and Hutu. You, on the other hand, were completely left behind. Both of them were almost at the top, but you had only climbed halfway. But it's not Yu's fault. It's mainly because of the gap in strength. However, Bufang frowned, a little suspicious. You still have fortune flatbreads. Why don't you use them? Maybe a miracle will happen if you eat them? Bufang withdrew his gaze. Bufang took out a death spicy strip and stared at the little girl. Pinching the chili strip, he stared at the little lowly and said, "Little Curse, this name isn't too good. I'll call you Little Curse. Little Curse, tell me, what do you want the death spicy strip for? Don't tell me you just want it. What the F***ck are you talking about?" The little girl wished she could bite Bufang. The Queen is right. Chefs are really annoying. Do you feel the Queen of Curses aura up ahead? That's right. That's me. After eating the spicy strip, the little girl puffed out her flat chest. Bufang paused. Did Kersey mean that after eating the spicy strip, she could regain the strength of the Queen of Curses? There was such a function? Even Bufang, the chef who created the death spicy strip, did not know that the death spicy strip could have such a function. However, he did not know whether the death spicy strip was true or not. Bufang gave the little girl the death spicy strip. The latter excitedly took the spicy strip and started munching on it. Her lips were red and swollen like sausages. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Kersey, you are the Queen's will. If the Queen sees you like this, I'm afraid she won't be able to hold you down anymore. Bufang did not doubt the little girl's words. Perhaps what the little lowly said was true. The Queen of Curses was really still asleep. However, Kersey could not really be regarded as a little girl. Although she was small, she had lived longer than Bufang. Who knew if she had any ulterior motives? However, according to Kersey's description, what is the soul demon's purpose? Bufang focused his eyes and stared at the little girl, who had stuffed the last bit of the spicy strip into her mouth. Her mouth was swollen, and her hands were red and oily. She even sucked on her fingers and burped. Only then did Bufang ask, "Kersey, tell me, what is the soul demon's purpose? Is it just to control Void City?" The little girl stopped what she was doing. She turned her head slightly. Her face was shrouded in darkness and terror. There was also a deep coldness. Because the soul god wants to wake up. she said. Her tone was as cold as the ice in the sky, and her eyes were indifferent and ruthless. Bufang's body was reflected in his pitch-black pupils, and the cursed snakes were coiling around him like silk. Bufang's breath caught in his throat, and he arched an eyebrow. He felt a great pressure suddenly descend on his shoulders. The little girl in front of him began to grow. From petite and cute, she grew taller and taller, noble and distant. A terrible aura spread in an instant, shaking the entire palace. Chapter 1778. A terrible aura spread in an instant and filled the whole palace. The little Loli's figure also slowly became tall and slender, as if her figure had transformed into the universe. She turned to look at Bufang, making Bufang feel tremendous pressure. The Queen of Curses? After eating the death spicy strip, she turned into the Queen of Curses. This little girl can really change at will. Bufang took a deep breath and looked indifferently at the woman in front of him, who was as hazy as a star. Her body was shrouded in a hazy curse aura. She was one of the people who stood at the top of the universe. "Are you afraid of me now?" the woman asked. Her voice was cold and distant. However, Bufang was quite familiar with the tone. It was Kersey's. Although the Queen of Curses' body had transformed, it was Kersey, the clone of the Queen's consciousness, who was in control of it. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. "I'm not afraid," Bufang shook his head. The Queen of Curses smiled. Then, she walked out of the door. As he took a step forward, an earth-shattering aura rumbled as it surged forth. The faces of the people fighting in front of the Queen of Curses' palace changed in an instant. Lord Go and the others fell to the ground and put some distance between them. The strength of the three great soul overlords in the heavenly demon array was too strong. Even Lord Go and the others felt that it was very difficult to form the array, and they were being suppressed. The three great soul overlords were full of confidence. However, when the Queen of Curses' world-shattering aura appeared, their expressions changed dramatically. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord was even more horrified. Impossible! How could the Queen of Curses appear again? Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord were also scared out of their wits. Didn't something happen to the Queen of Curses? Why did she appear again? No. This is not the Queen of Curses. It must be fake. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord narrowed his eyes and said coldly. The three of them formed the heavenly demon array, glanced at Lord Go and the others, and then soared into the sky. Monstrous sinful energy spread out and quickly turned into a terrifying whirlwind. A torrential aura filled the sky, destroying heaven and earth as it turned into a giant arm. The arm stretched across the void and slammed toward the Queen of Curses, who was standing at the door. This was treason. However, at this moment, the three great soul overlords were completely unbridled. After all, the Queen of Curses was in existence on the same level as the Soul God. Duchess Nightmare, Duchess Yunlan, and the others had ugly expressions on their faces. These soul demons were provoking the majesty of Void City and the Queen of Curses. However, there was nothing they could do. The three great soul overlords trapped in the heavenly demon formation were too strong. Rumble! The ground of the Queen of Curses' palace began to crack. In the void, the starry sky trembled and cracked, as if stars were falling and shooting stars were streaking across the sky. The Queen of Curses was noble, indifferent, cold, and heartless. She stood in front of the door and looked indifferently at the three great soul overlords' crazy attacks. "Die!" the Queen of Curses said lightly. His voice resounded throughout Void City. Everyone's hair stood on end. A murderous aura spread through the void, and an invisible darkness descended. Bufang watched all this from behind the door. Although Kersey was the clone of the Queen's will, she carried the Queen's will. Obviously, she did not want the Queen's majesty to be violated. Rumble! The Queen of Curses raised her hand. The next moment, an illusory palm materialized in midair, then shot toward the heavenly demon formation that the three great soul overlords were attacking. A collision broke out in an instant. Gluttony great soul overlord's pupils constricted. If his guess was right, the Queen of Curses was fake. Envy great soul overlord and greed great soul overlord were also overwhelmed with emotions. If they could severely damage the Queen's majesty and pull her down from her pedestal, Void City would be theirs. Kill them! They roared. It was an earth-shattering collision. The next moment, the world fell silent. Rumble! After the collision, half of Void City began to crumble. The three great soul overlords were scared out of their wit. The moment their bodies collided, they were crushed by a terrifying force. Bam! 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 The three great soul overlords' fleshly bodies exploded in an instant, turning into countless pieces of flesh that filled the air. The heavenly demon formation was destroyed with one move. It was as fragile as a pancake. Everyone was dumbstruck. The army of soul demons was silent. In midair, the pressure on Xiao Xiaolong and the others was greatly relieved. The army of soul demons was frightened. The three great soul overlords were defeated in an instant. How could they have the courage to fight back? Some soul demons had already begun to flee in panic. Bam! The ground crumbled and huge cracks spread across it. The Queen of Curses, standing in front of the door, seemed to have dimmed a little. Suddenly many people froze, because an arm reached out from behind the door and handed a long thing to the Queen of Curses. She took it, stuffed it into her mouth, and began to chew. What the F***ck? Hades' Era's eyes widened. He did not know what to say. Lord Go and the others looked at him in confusion. Don't you recognize it? Hades' Era's face was filled with excitement. He pointed at the Queen of Curses and said, Don't you recognize the thing sticking out from behind the door? Lord Go and the dukes looked puzzled. They still did not understand. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Hades' Era rubbed his chin excitedly. Spicy strips. I can recognize them even if they turn into ashes. It was the death spicy strip that the Queen had stuffed into her mouth just now. I didn't expect that the Queen of Curses is a kindred spirit like I. She is indeed the Queen of Curses who controls Void City and watches over the universe. She has good taste. In midair, the true forms of the three soul demons appeared. They were shivering. Gluttony. Didn't you King say that there's something wrong with the Queen of Curses? Envy great soul overlord growled. Their fleshly bodies had been destroyed by that one move just now. Was there something wrong with the Queen? Greed great soul overlord had lost all hope. I can't believe the Queen of Curses has awakened. We're doomed. We're doomed. We can't go back. Gluttony great soul overlord was horrified as well. If he was not mistaken the first time, there was definitely something wrong with the Queen's body. Otherwise, she would not have turned into a child and run into the palace. What was the situation now? But no matter what, they were going to be defeated this time. They were no match for the Queen of Curses, even when she was weak. She was in existence on the same level as the Soul God. Bufang leaned against the door of the palace, the corners of his mouth curling up slightly. Not bad. It feels good to hug someone's thigh. Although it's a fake thigh, no one knows it. Kill them, Bufang said. However, the Queen of Curses, who was Cursey, did not kill them. She had eaten another death spicy strip, which meant she had another chance to strike. Buzz Cursey raised her hand. Her noble hand moved gracefully. Then, she gently tapped the void. Rumble! The three great soul overlords turned and were about to flee. However, they were horrified to find that the void was frozen. The void around their bodies was being sliced apart inch by inch, constantly closing in on them. Soon, the three great soul overlords were trapped in a narrow square space. The cage of nothingness. The three great soul overlords trembled with fear and did not dare to move. The cage of nothingness was the Queen of Curses' divine power. If they tried to break out of the cage, they would be cut to pieces in an instant. It was over. The battle was completely over. The soul demon's 1,000-year hegemony was completely over. The three great soul overlords closed their eyes in despair. After using the cage of nothingness, the Queen of Curse's body seemed to become unstable again. She re-entered the palace and hid behind the door. Bufang could not help but twitch his mouth as he watched the Queen's graceful figure gradually turn into a little girl. I can't hold on any longer. Kersey's face was pale, and her body seemed to be fading away. Every time I use the Queen's will, I have to rest for a long time. This time, I've used it twice in a row. It's too much of a burden for me, she said, leaning against the wall. Holding the death spicy strip in his hand, Bufang paused. Do you still want spicy strips? Bufang asked after thinking for a moment. Kersey rolled her eyes at him. Bufang put away the spicy strip and handed her an oyster pancake. After eating it, her face looked much better. Why didn't you kill them? These great soul overlords are disgusting. They deserve to die, Bufang said. I dare not. Kersey said as she ate the oyster pancake. Dare not? Why not? You are the Queen of Curses. Bufang was puzzled. I'm the fake Queen of Curses. Kersey rolled her eyes. When I sealed them, I sensed a pair of eyes staring at me. If I really killed them, I felt a terrible will descend. At that time, I really couldn't hold on any longer. Kersey said. Bufang paused. There was a will behind the great soul overlords? The will of Soul God? Had Soul God awakened? After eating, Kersey breathed a sigh of relief. I don't think it's Soul God. Although I don't know what happened back then, one thing is certain. Soul God's injury is no weaker than the Queen's. If the Queen shows no sign of waking up, Soul God won't wake up so early. Kersey was full of confidence. Bufang, however, was very suspicious. Could this little girl be a poisonous healer? If Soul God really woke up, who could stop him? In the palace, the competition on the Stairway of Star had reached a white-hot stage. Rumble, outside the palace, a huge projection suddenly descended. That startled everyone, and they jerked their heads around. One by one, all eyes fell on the back of the palace. There, the projection of the Stairway of Star descended over the palace. The competition on the Stairway of Star also came into view. At this moment, the competition between cursed goddess Soul, Hutu, and Yu was exposed to everyone in Void City. At the top of the Stairway of Star was a throne. It was the throne of Void City. At this moment, everyone understood. Whoever sat on the throne first would be the ruler of Void City. An uproar broke out among the nobles in an instant. The few dukes widened their eyes. Duchess Yunlan put a hand to her forehead. You didn't let me down. You're indeed the last of the three cursed goddesses. Duchess Nightmare, on the other hand, looked extremely nervous. Hutu was following closely behind cursed goddess Soul. In the prison of Void, the true forms of the three imprisoned great soul overlords were hissing and roaring. They stared at the Void. They watched as Soul took the lead to step by step toward the throne. Their originally dead thoughts were rekindled from the dead. If Soul sat on the throne, there would still be hope for the Soul Demon's 1,000-year hegemony. Everyone was watching nervously. Every step of the Stairway of Star was tugging at their hearts. Everyone knew it. They were witnessing the birth of the new Queen of Curses. However, the current situation, could it really be Soul? The 92nd step of the Stairway of Star, Soul. The 91st step of the Stairway of Star, Hutu. The 56th step of the Stairway of Star, Yu. Suddenly, there seemed to be no suspense in the ranking. Hutu gritted her teeth and followed behind Soul. The higher she climbed, the more terrifying the aura emanating from the Stairway of Star became. It was so terrifying that it was very difficult for them to even lift their feet. Perhaps only by circulating the bloodline of the cursed goddess in her body could she climb up. Hutu did not want to lose. If she lost, the war between the primitive universe and the soul demon universe would be rewritten, and that was not what she wanted to see. Soul's eyes were filled with excitement. With great difficulty, she climbed one step after another. The throne of Void City was getting closer and closer to her. All the people who were watching could not help but clench their fists. Who would the throne belong to? Bufang was also staring. Suddenly, the corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. He found that Yu, who was hanging at the bottom, took a deep breath and took out a biscuit from her pocket. She glanced up and finally took a bite of the biscuit in her hand. Chapter 1779. Yu hesitated for a long time, but in the end she ate the flatbread. It was the fortune flatbread that Bufang had left for her. There were only 2 in total, and she had eaten one before. Now this was the last one. However, she looked at Soul and Hutu, who were almost at the top of the stairway of star. Yu still thought that eating the flatbread was the best option. Perhaps, after eating it, she would have a chance to make a breakthrough. Otherwise, she would have no chance at all. In the beginning, Yu wanted to see the result of the competition between Soul and Hutu. She did not want Soul to sit on the throne, and it would be best if Hutu could beat Soul. However, from the beginning to the end, Hutu had been suppressed by Soul. If this went on, Hutu basically had no chance of beating Soul. And that was indeed the case. Hutu felt exhausted. The throne seemed to become illusory in her eyes, getting farther and farther away from her. Soul, on the other hand, was tired, but her eyes were firm. It seemed that she still had some leeway. She took a step forward. She glanced over her shoulder at Hutu, who was behind her. She gasped for breath and smiled. "It's a pity that you've lost," Soul said. "The throne of Void City belongs to me." As soon as her voice rang out, she sped up. The experts of Void City burst into an uproar of despair. Everyone could sense Soul's ambition. She had lured an army of soul demons into Void City, which was an act that would destroy the city in a day. Therefore, the nobles did not want Soul to sit on the throne. Otherwise, what was the purpose of so many of them fighting so desperately against the soul demons? Wherever they went, the universe would collapse and all living beings would be plunged into misery and suffering. They were synonymous with destruction. How could Void City become a paradise for such creatures? However, many nobles were in despair. Soul was still suppressing Hutu, and as time went by, she was getting closer and closer to the throne. For the experts of Void City, hope was getting slimmer and slimmer. Duchess Nightmare clenched her fists tightly. She was so nervous that she could hardly breathe. Lord Go and the others were relatively calm when the time came. Of course, this is also because the gap between us is too big. Otherwise, they might have been as excited as Duchess Nightmare. After all, you are an acquaintance of theirs. Sigh. It seems like everything has been decided. Kersey leaned against the door and looked at the competition on the stairway of star. She could not help but sigh. Although Huda carried the hope, the gap between them was not so easy to make up. Cursed Goddess Soul's cultivation base was profound to begin with, and now that she had broken through to the level of a chaotic saint, her victory was basically assured. As the will of the queen, can't you control the person who inherits the throne? Bufang looked at Kersey in confusion. Aren't you afraid that Cursed Goddess Soul will destroy Void City after she sits on the throne? I'm afraid, but there's no point in being afraid. The little lowly pouted. I'm just an avatar of the Queen's will. I don't have power or authority. What can I do? I'm desperate too. Bufang, there's no other way. We have to get ready. Once Soul inherits the throne, the soul demons will definitely sweep through Void City. Kersey heaved a sigh, feeling a little helpless. Don't worry. It's not the end yet. The outcome is still unknown. Bufang frowned and looked at you. Don't tell me you still have hope in you? Soul has climbed to the 90th step, but she's still at the 60th. There's no way she can turn the tables. Kersey was somewhat speechless. Bufang glanced at her. That's hard to say. The fortune flatbread is still in Yu's hand. With the fortune flatbread in hand, anything was possible. Bufang's eyes lit up when he saw Yu eating the flatbread. On the stairway of star. After taking a bite of the flatbread, Yu's aura changed abruptly. It was as if a wave of air had wrapped around her, making her body stand tall and straight. A powerful aura kept surging around her. Yu's eyes became deep, and a crystal core formed between her brows. His pitch-black hair was fluttering in the wind, her red lips parted slightly. Yu glanced around and rested her eyes on Sol and Hutu, who were at the top of the stairway of star. Then, she strode forward with her long, fair legs. With every step she took, the stairway of star seemed to tremble. Rumble! Yu shot up like a rocket in an instant. The fortune flatbread seemed to have produced some amazing effect again. Naturally, many people also paid attention to Nethery. Everyone sucked in a cold breath, because Yu's temperament had suddenly changed. 1 step, 3 steps. She walked as fast as she could on the stairway of star. Everyone was in an uproar. Duchess Yunlan, who was holding her forehead with one hand, paused and could not help looking over. What happened? Duchess Yunlan could not help but murmur as she looked at Yu, who had suddenly erupted. Has this girl been pretending to be weak all this time? Why did she only erupt now? Is she going to play a trick on us? What if we lose? The whole Void City will fall into eternal damnation. Hades' Era and Lord Go were excited. Many nobles seemed to see hope. Even if the hope was slim. After all, the gap between them was too great. You took 3 steps at a time. Even if you catch up, it will take you at least 10 steps. Sol, on the other hand, might have reached the top a long time ago. She could not catch up. Many people shook their heads in despair. The soul demons also cried out in alarm. The 3 great soul overlords imprisoned in the cage of nothingness roared at the top of their lungs. Sol sitting on the throne was their only hope to get out of the cage. They had pinned all their hopes on Sol. Naturally, they did not want any variables to appear. With her hands clasped behind her back, Yu took 1 step at a time. Her speed was neither fast nor slow. If you were a docile kitten before, you were now like a running cheetah. Hutu's scalp tightened. She glanced over her shoulder and met Yu's deep gaze, which almost made her fall. Sol, on the other hand, felt her hair stand on end. After glancing at Yu, she sped up without hesitation. She would not give up. The throne of Void City belonged to her. How is this possible? Did you cheat? Kersey was bewildered. She even wondered if she was a jinx now. She had said that Sol would win. Could it be that Sol was really going to turn the tables? Can't I cheat? Bufang glanced at her. Besides, eating a biscuit to replenish your strength when you're tired is also considered cheating? The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Kersey was speechless. So, Yu's outburst has something to do with this chef. You ran as fast as you could. The nobles' hearts were in their throats. The soul demons growled as well. After all, the result of the stairway of star could affect the final situation. The nobles, who were used to betting on the race, could not help but feel excited at this moment. After all, the future of Void City was at stake this time. A look of joy came over Hutu's face. As long as it was not Sol who sat on the throne, everything would be fine. Even if it was not her, she did not care. Her purpose in coming to Void City was to stop Sol and the soul demons. It's up to you now, Hutu said, looking at Yu. At this moment, Nethery had arrived at her position. You had forced her to a tie. However, you did not slow down at all. You were still walking steadily, taking 3 steps with each step. You gave Hutu a deep look. When their eyes met, she nodded faintly. She took a step forward, and a gust of fragrance surged as she sped forward. The 97th step of the stairway of star. Sol. The 92nd step of the stairway of star. You. As for Hutu, she had given up the competition. She had pinned all her hopes on you. How is this possible? Soul glanced over her shoulder and saw Nethery's approaching figure. How could she be so fast? Wasn't she struggling at the 60th step just now? No. I won't lose. I can't lose. Soul's eyes narrowed as she roared. She had put in so much effort and sacrificed everything for this moment. How could she fail at this moment? Using both hands and feet, Soul clenched her teeth as she climbed up. Her forehead was covered in sweat, and her entire body was soaked in sweat. The atmosphere became more and more stagnant. Countless people were staring at the projection of the Stairway of Star in silence. They wanted to know the final outcome. Yu's rise was beyond everyone's expectations. However, those who were familiar with Yu were not surprised. After all, behind Soul stood the Soul Demon Universe. However, behind Yu stood Bufang. Chapter 1780. The battle for the throne had finally come to an end. However, the suspense was still there, because no one knew who the final victor would be. Was it Yu? Or was it cursed goddess Soul? Both of their feet stepped onto the 100th step almost at the same time. At that moment, the light was dazzling, and the starry sky trembled. Bufang narrowed his eyes and stared at the throne. Kersey could not help craning her neck. The throne was very important. After all, it determined the future of Void City and the life and death of many universes. Duchess Nightmare's eyes widened. Duchess Yunlan was also breathing rapidly. She covered her mouth with one hand, and her chest was heaving up and down. Lord Go stuck out his tongue, and Hades' Era almost dropped the spicy strip between his lips. In the distance, the three great soul overlords imprisoned in the cage of void were dumbfounded. How could this be? Wasn't victory in hand? Shouldn't it be a crushing defeat? Why was there such a tie? That cursed goddess was so weak. How could she catch up with Soul? The palm of Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's true form could not help but touch the edge of the cage. A ripping sound rang out as his palm was cut off, causing him to howl miserably. A piece of his true form had been cut off, which was a serious injury to him. However, he could not care less. He needed to know the final result. Everything they had done was for this moment. Countless soul demons were panting violently. Hoodoo was transfixed as she stared blankly at the two figures in front of her. Then, a great repulsive force erupted, pushing her away from the Stairway of Star. As a result, her body fell to the ground. At the highest point, the light was dazzling. The thrones seemed to be choosing their final destination. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the light finally began to change. Soul turned her head and stared at Yu. Her black eyes were shining brightly. Yu, on the other hand, were very calm. Rumble. Suddenly, Void City began to tremble. The expressions of Bufang and Kersey flickered. It's begun. Kersey's breathing quickened as she shouted excitedly. Bufang froze. Hoodoo raised her head. Countless people were watching. A wisp of extremely pure curse energy rose from the throne into the sky. Then, it bloomed in the void and turned into a stream of light. That flowing light was constantly twisting, like a fluttering phoenix, a graceful divine sparrow. Suddenly, the phoenix spread its wings. It turned into the figure of a woman. That woman's figure was noble and peaceful, as if she wanted to embrace the world. She crossed her arms and slowly floated down from the sky. This was a woman formed from the aura of curses. She landed in front of Yu and Soul. Her choice seemed to determine the final ruler of Void City. Soul's breathing quickened. She stared fixedly at the figure transformed from the curse energy. This was the Queen's will, the will to find an heir. With the promise of this will, she would be able to sit on the throne and become the ruler of Void City. Supreme and supreme. Choose me. It's the fastest I've ever reached. Choose me. I've been ahead all the way. Why can't you choose me? I'm better than her. Soul's voice became a little hoarse. You watched indifferently and did not argue. She stuck out her tongue and licked her lip. She wanted to eat another fortune flatbread. Buzz, suddenly, a look of excitement came over Soul's face. Because the woman formed by the pure power of the curse looked at her, and slowly raised her hand. This scene caused everyone to be in disbelief. A look of despair came over the faces of many nobles of Void City. Dukes, marquises, counts, viscounts, and many others were in despair. They did not dare to imagine what would happen if Void City fell into Soul's hands. Would it really become a paradise for soul demons? Would all of them become prisoners of the soul demons? Despair. Sorrow filled everyone's hearts. In the cage, the three great soul overlords roared excitedly. The soul demons growled as well. Their terrible voices shook the whole Void City. A happy smile came over Soul's face. That's right. Choose me. I'm the most suitable heir. She looked at the arm of the cursed woman, who kept approaching her. She could no longer hide the excitement on her face. Sure enough, she was the winner. How could a woman who relied on a chef be better than her? Oh! Suddenly, Soul's body shook violently. That was because the cursed woman had raised her hand and placed a slender finger between her eyebrows. Then, she slowly pushed it forward. Soul froze. She felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. In a flash, her mind and soul seemed to be stripped away, and her blood was frozen. Rumble! A huge force that she couldn't resist exploded. As a result, her figure was directly knocked down from the stairway of starry sky. No! It was accompanied by a cry of disbelief. Soul kept struggling, clawing at her arms and legs in front of her. Rumble! Unfortunately, a rumbling sound rang out, but she was still smashed to the ground. You froze for a moment. The woman formed by the power of the curse floated in front of her like a pure elemental spirit. She spread her arms. What are you doing? Nethery was taken aback. Suddenly, she looked at the woman transformed from the curse power with a vigilant face. However, the latter suddenly pounced on her, and in an instant, like flowing water, he fused into her body. The throne changed abruptly. Nethery felt that there was a tremendous force supporting her. There seemed to be countless voices ringing in her head. That voice seemed to be whispering, singing, and also like the whispers of best friends. Yu's eyes were blank. Her body was being protected as she slowly floated towards the throne. The black dress she was wearing changed. The originally plain long dress suddenly seemed to have small black phoenixes landing on it, causing the dress to become graceful and noble. Her hair waved and coiled around the top of her head. Her fair legs were no longer exposed. They were wrapped in the dress, and the back of the dress became extremely long and narrow. Gradually, it covered her back like a black cloth that blotted out the sky. However, the cloth was covered with strange patterns. Everyone was stunned. They stared blankly at the scene. No one dared to breathe too loudly or make a sound. You stood on the throne, slightly dumbfounded. So, was she victorious? So, she had become the heir of Void City. The heir of a piece of biscuit? You had a strange expression on her face. An irresistible force seemed to fall on her shoulders, causing her to slowly sit on the throne. The moment she sat on the throne, the whole Void City seemed to be boiling with excitement. Rumble! Outside Void City, a huge bone ship soared into the sky. A huge black phoenix that blotted out the sky spread its wings and flew. A huge black dragon let out a dragon roar and stretched across the starry sky. Void City, it was as if it had been completely revived. The destroyed buildings were quickly restored to their original state at a speed visible to the naked eye. Kersey stared blankly at you, who was sitting on the throne. She's really a poisonous healer. Huda clenched her fists excitedly. She actually won. She did not know how the outcome was decided in the end. But, no matter what, it was good that she won. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back. The corners of his mouth curved upward slightly as he looked at you, who was sitting on the throne. He breathed a sigh of relief. By the looks of it, you are going to become the Queen of Void City, aren't you? Many years later, you might become the legendary Queen of Curses? The thought of it made him somewhat excited. In the distance, Sol rolled to her feet and let out a heart-wrenching roar. Why? Why? How could she have lost? That woman relied on a chef. How could she win? I don't accept this. I don't accept this. Sol was so angry that she went mad. Her eyes turned scarlet and black in an instant. Wisps of sinful power burst out of her and enveloped her in an instant. Then, she soared into the sky. At this moment, she was like a monstrous demon. She stepped on the ground and soared into the sky, step by step. Then, she went straight toward you, who was sitting on the throne. Rumble! Black smoke billowed. Sol stepped on the black smoke and faced you directly. They looked at each other as equals, and their auras fluctuated violently. Outside the palace, cheers resounded through Void City in a flash. They never thought that. Their hearts were beating fast. Some nobles wept with joy. They had seen everything that the soul demons had done after entering Void City. If they really allowed the soul demons to roam freely in the city, it would not be long before the city turned into a land of death. However, they did not have to worry about that now. The soul demons were defeated. The army of soul demons howled miserably. The three great soul overlords also cried out in disbelief. Defeated? Sol was defeated. She was defeated by that weak cursed goddess. Duchess Nightmare let out a long roar. She was very excited. Duchess Yunlan stood rooted to the spot. She needed some time to calm down. That chef really helped you ascend to the throne. Lord Go twitched his mouth. Hades' Era danced with excitement. Little Hu, on the other hand, jumped up and down on Xiao Bai's shoulder. Xiaopi lay on his stomach and slowly blew a bubble. With a pop, the bubble burst. Bufang's emotions were somewhat complicated. However, when he saw Sol confronting you, he frowned. He was about to go up and help. However, he was stopped by Kersey. "What are you doing?" "You don't need your help now," Kersey said with a smile. Kersey seemed very happy as she said with a smile. "Oh." Bufang raised his brows slightly. "What does this little girl mean?" In midair, Sol, stepping on the black cloud of sin, roared at you. A black ball appeared in her hand. The branches of the soul-devouring tree emerged from it. They turned into thousands of sharp spears, all pointing at the graceful and noble you sitting on the throne. "The throne is mine. No one can take it away from me." Sol roared. She didn't dare. She was angry, she roared, and she was afraid. She was worried that her failure would disappoint that person. Rumble! A terrible aura rolled, and the cultivation base of a chaotic saint erupted to the fullest. Then, like a rain of arrows, the spears of the soul-devouring tree rained down on you. They wanted to devour you in an instant. Bufang frowned. Kersey was very calm. As the rain of arrows approached, the void began to shatter. Sitting on the throne, however, little Yo was very calm. It was a calmness that came from the inside out. She raised a hand. She pointed at the void with her fair hand. Then, the rain of tens of thousands of arrows came to a halt at this moment. They could not fall even an inch. You raised her chin and waved her hand. The sound of ice crystals shattering rang out. Countless black soul-devouring spears burst into pieces. You flipped her hand. In her hand a round, black gem appeared. It was a very noble black, the kind that seemed to devour all darkness. This is the symbol of the Queen of Void City. The #1 treasure of Void City, the weapon of the Queen of Curses, the cursed stone. The little lowly Kersey screamed excitedly. As she screamed, she jumped around non-stop. Crack, crack. You spread her palm and gave it a thought. Immediately, something materialized in front of her body. It was condensed from the purest power of curses. It turned into a small boat. Bufang paused, and so did Lord Go, Hades' Era, and the others. It was the Netherworld ship. The cursed stone in Yu's hand flew out and embedded itself in the center of the Netherworld ship. You landed on the deck of the Netherworld ship and stood there. Bufang was a little absent-minded. She looked just like the Netherworld woman he had met for the first time in the relic. Standing on the Netherworld ship, you slowly pointed a finger. Boom! An unparalleled power burst forth. Sol's pupils constricted. Everything around his body exploded with a loud bang. The black ball in his hand also exploded. A withered soul-devouring tree branch fell from it, turning into ashes. Slash. She spat out blood. She flew out of the palace. She landed outside the palace. It fell in front of everyone's eyes. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.